Are you doing well? Good morning. It's midnight here for me, so technically it is the start of a new day. I hope you've all been well, and I hope you all had a lovely weekend. I do apologize that I'm talking a little bit quieter today. It's just trying to be careful not to wake people, as always. uh, Let me just make sure of something. I'm pretty sure they should all be working fine. Yeah, yeah, I think everything's good. Yeah, okay. So, welcome back. I was trying to figure out what exactly what I would do today, and I was trying to decide between doing something like ASMR or doing continuing on with our reading, and I've decided that we're going to continue on with reading Barry Strauss's The Trojan War. Now I'm a little bit more prepared today. Mm, mm. I was actually doing some reading earlier today, but I'm a little bit more prepared today because I went out and I went searching a little and I got some maps and I took some photos of the maps in the book. So if they should be needed, it should be. I hope they'll be more clear to you guys if we're reading about places and certain directions that they're going. But yes, reading is always very good, Hanbun. And Hanbun, I know I said on Twitter, but congratulations on getting. I didn't see if it was a full 2D rigged model, but at least congrats on getting the art for your model. It looks really really good. The blush was so cute, but the I'm gonna have to check out the VOD. I'll probably do it after stream or else tomorrow when I wake up. So what I might just do real quick is it's a PNG. You and I are now like, yes. Although you technically had a moving model, so it's almost like a weird side grade where like the art was so good. The art was your mama did such a wonderful job, and I imagine you guys were constantly going back and forth and working through things how you wanted it to go about. But I really think your idea of sort of this uh, half human, half bunny kind of surgical situation. It's a really really cool and kind of unique look. Not many people I think would have like surgical scars on their model, but I think it really suits you. It looks fantastic. I love it. I love it. Um, we were in constant contact, but it was a lot less difficult than you might imagine. No, no worries at all. Um, Mm, I get you. Like I imagine you probably had a very clear idea in your head, and I mean I'm going back and forth with my mama. Although right now she's just off creating. It took me a little while because I was trying to figure out like what things I wanted, and we were trying to get down on certain details on things like color. I feel like you might have already had a stronger conception of what you wanted your character to be. While when I went with my mama and I first like said, "Hey, I'd like to commission you," I still wasn't really sure, and the design process for me was part of the commission. So maybe a little bit different there, but it's a really fun creating a model, and it's even and I'm sure you know yourself, Handbun, especially getting the finished version. It's so amazing seeing like the development of the sketch, the ideas starting to come together, and everything just fitting so nicely, so nicely. While I'm here, I will do this. Is this how you do it? To shout out someone, do you just do apostrophe or not apostrophe exclamation mark SO and then just handbun? You don't have to do like at handbun. We'll find out. I don't know if that worked. Is shout out only something you can do when you're? No, I think it's something you can do. I don't know how it works. I may have done that wrong. Oh wait, I think I don't know. Anyway, I'll just say openly, just go follow Handbun. I caught one of his streams, and he's a really cool dude. Speaking of other streamers, actually, Son Albionus, who is currently reading the Iliad, uh, we had a lovely conversation, and he was telling me a little bit about these things called Herculaneum. Was that it? Herculaneum scrolls, and these are essentially scrolls that were found in charred, like old philosophical texts from ancient Greece, and they are charred, like, and you can see even the the scroll wound up. You can see the lines in it, and basically it's so difficult to for the scientists and stuff to be able to read them, because if you try and unscroll them, they just fall apart. So he was telling me how they attempted to use strings that would pull the scrolls slowly open, by like a cup, maybe like a couple of millimeters every month or something, like tiny tiny amounts. But unfortunately, that didn't work for some of them. It did for some, but now apparently they're using lasers. But sorry for proofing. I had to take a conversation. I believe in the end they did it via X-rays. That's what Sun was saying. Or for proofing. Oh yeah, no worries, no worries. Um, yeah, I haven't read into it myself fully. He was saying that it was something to do with lasers and X-rays and stuff. But I was saying to Sun how hard it must be for those archaeologists and those scientists and historians, knowing that those things, especially the philosophers, I think as well, um, knowing those things are so tantalizingly close, so close that if they might not have existed if they hadn't been burned in such a way. They may have been lost like so many other texts, but they're there, they're right there, and they just need to open them up. Unless they have done, unless everything's cool now and it's like, yep, they're done. Like a bad parent. Oh no, hand bun. Oh, hugs for hand bun. Um, but I actually was doing some reading myself. Going back to what you said about reading is always good. I was not speaking from experience, just a funny. Yeah, yeah. Okay, that's good to know. That's good to know. Um, I was doing some reading myself. I finished a relatively tough book called The Theological Origins of Modernity. I think it's a fantastic work that really gives great insight into many of the historically important philosophers, Descartes, Hume. Well, not Hume, not necessarily much of Hume, but Hobbes, Kant, Hegel, and many of those coming after. Uh, but he ties this aspect of the the importance of what was known as the nominalist revolution in the Catholic Church to the development of modernity and the development of the modern idea of the sciences and nature being paramount. It's a really, really great book, and perhaps sometime I will read it. It's still difficult because it does, at times, it kind of both requires, although sometimes he explains it quite well, background in these philosophers, and it's as someone who doesn't study philosophy, as like in a thing, it can be quite difficult in a course. It can be quite difficult because you don't get full exposure to many of these. But it definitely opened my eyes to some of the background thoughts that were going on for some of the philosophers that I have read, such as Thomas Hobbes and Descartes and stuff. So it was really, really great book. I'm trying to think how could I possibly do reading streams of it, because it's quite a long book. It's a big enough book, and both thick and also just like size of pages and size of text. I'm thinking perhaps I could try and do some kind of summary, break things down, explain some of the ideas behind it. I think that could be a good idea. But yeah, that's kind of how my weekend went. I also went for a nice run um, over the yesterday, and I can feel it today. So I feel like my back is pretty much all good. I think I was mentioning how my back was a little bit tight over the past couple of days, but it seems solid. So back to the gym tomorrow, and I'll be nice and happy. What did I want to do real quick? I wanted to just quickly check something. Yeah, that was it. Okay. So, I think what we will do now is we will continue with our reading. Now, in reading the Trojan War, we learned a little bit about the archaeology of Troy, about how it was found by a man by the name of Schliemann, who was a bit of a hack archaeologist, an amateur, but he did find Troy, and he kind of used a bit of TNT to get down to where he wanted to go, misidentifying which layer Troy was, going back too far, but finding that it is either Troy 6 or Troy layer 7, the stratas of Troy, which is the one of our focus. We also learned a little bit about how we are able to actually know about Troy, not just through Homer, but through the prevalence of Hittite texts and many of the other various kingdoms around Troy, around the time of Troy and the Mycenaeans at that time. We also learned a little bit about Helen and why it might have been done through Homer, why Homer might have used Helen as the precursor for the war, the way that it ties into how the heroes of the Egyptians, for example, were often portrayed as, and many of the conflicts, that many of the kingdoms around there, such as the Egyptians, would often put conflicts in terms of personal vendettas and rivalries, rather than necessarily stately threats or aims. And thus the personal and God aspect, the divine justice aspect, plays an important role in the back in the time of the late Bronze Age, and thus in positing that it was in justice for the breaking of the conventions of generosity that Paris would have been under in stealing away with Helen, as well as the underlying aspects for Menelaus's position, having only married into the Spartan royal family, losing his claim essentially, and being seen as a weak mark potentially if he did not respond in kind. We now have both the Homeric justification as well as the underlying justification for the war. And thus we come to chapter 2. So just a quick summary from what best I can remember. We come to chapter 2, the black ships sail. So let me... The king of all Argos, and of many an isle, stands on the rocky soil and surveys his feet, stands on the rocky soil and surveys his fleet. Before him in the harbour lie hundreds of wooden ships, their hulls coated in black pitch, their hollow interiors carrying men and supplies, preparing to bring ruin to King Priam and the people of Troy. Or so we might imagine, King Agamemnon, son of Atreus, on the eve of the Greeks' departure for war. The hills echo with the shouts of the harbour master and the cries of the captains. Horses are whinnying, low, fast, and urgently. Sailors call out curses, and every now and then there comes the crack of a stick on the back of some slacking menial. The priests are mumbling something to each other, the oxen bellow, and in the distance, through the noise, there is a sound of the salt sea slapping against the ships. Agamemnon towers above his servants. He is a big man, healthy and muscular. Homer gives him the broad shoulders of a javelin champion, and as a king he is likely to be well fed and tall, nearly 6 feet tall, to judge from the skeletons found in the royal graves of Mycenae. That was a great height then, when the average Greek male stood only about 5 feet 5 inches. He's a veteran warrior, but if Agamemnon has a broken bone or two from past battles, it doesn't show, because the fractures would have been set by the palace physician, and so would have healed perfectly. He has long hair and fiery eyes that offer, in turn, hints of passion, brutality, and resignation. His lips border a beard, his teeth shine gleaming white. He is dressed in a soft, newly made tunic, underneath a big, sleeveless cloak. He wears fine leather sandals. A silver-studded sword hangs from an ox-hide strap around his shoulders. On sleepless nights, says Homer, when the cares of office weigh, Agamemnon is in the habit of replacing the cloak with a lion skin, a reminder of his power. He was the greatest king in Greece. Potential rivals ruled in Pylos and Tiryns, but Sparta was in the hands of his younger brother, and the power of Thebes had been broken in a civil war the generation before. No wonder Homer reserves Agamemnon the title Anax, harkening back to the Bronze Age term for king, Wanax. Agamemnon was rich and had a big army and navy. His domain was centered in the northeastern Peloponnese, but it extended to the islands of the Aegean, perhaps as far as east as Rhodes. I would tower over the Greeks. Whoa, Hanbun's a tall. Yeah, 5'5" is quite short, isn't it? Being able to eat good food allows us to grow a little bit taller than 5'5" for the average male. Yes, my 2-inch lead on them would be tremendous. You would tower, but they would treat you like a king, Hanbun. A weirdly bunny-like king. They'd probably consider you half deity in some way. Was there any bunny Greek god, I wonder? Maybe one of the nature ones. Oh, actually, I wanted to. Someone had asked earlier. I think it might have been you, Hanbun, or it might have been. I think it was Clever. Someone had asked about that Menelaus ruled Sparta, even though the Spartans, to my knowledge, were not necessarily. Ooh, did I drop? I don't think so. I think my stream chat's just being annoying. Okay. But it was a question of whether it would have been called Sparta, or whether it was in the area that the Spartan city was. And I did a little bit of searching, not deep researching in a library or anything, but just seeing what I could find quickly. And it turns out that essentially the area that they believe Menelaus would have ruled over would not have been the Spartan city that we know. The Spartan area at the time was apparently a very small settlement. However, there is a settlement a couple of kilometers, I believe, to the south of where Sparta is situated, that in that time period seems to coincide with a great area of people and great power, or at least a strong enough power anyway, big enough settlement. So it is likely not that it probably wouldn't have been called Sparta, but it is simply giving a sense of continuity with Homer's day and age, and of course the people later. Would it have been called Sparta back then? I don't think so, but it's roughly in the same area. It's still in the South Peloponnese of Lacedaemon. There certainly was. Whether or not they were put onto paper is a different matter. I might be misremembering. I might have just gone off on a tangent and be misunderstanding. Hello, Haru. How are you? Are you good? Aw, cute Sasa scare. It looks so silly. There certainly was. Whether or not they were put into paper was a different matter. Yeah, I don't know. For some reason, my mind has drawn a blank. But anyway, so that covers basically Clever's question. As in, we probably don't have records of them, but there was a god for. Oh, sorry. Yes, 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 yes. Oh, I was talking about rabbit gods. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, there was like every like stream had some kind of god or spirit, and typically like the way I understand it, it would have been like sort of varying levels of divinity or power. Um, these lower gods would be in some way probably in in subservience to the higher gods, which would be of a greater universal to whatever their area corresponds to. Gucci, Yar, how about you? I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good. Nice and relaxed. It's very, very windy out, and I have the nice sound of, well, it's not too heavy rain, but I can hear it every now and again. But when it's nice and windy out and I feel nice and cozy, one of the great things about a PC actually is how it kind of works like a heater. How's your back? Yeah, pretty good. Pretty good. I think it's pretty much all good now. I think I just need to work it a little, do some deadlifts and some squats. I went for a run earlier today and yesterday, so I'm all good. How are you? Oh wait, I asked you already, Haru. um, but yes, thank you so much for asking. It's always annoying when your back gets injured because there's so little you can do. Um, for at least a day because like everything hurts. Walking hurts. Trying to twist your body hurts. It's not like oh I kind of pulled a muscle in my shoulder or my chest where you can kind of work around that. It's like your back, your spine. It's like nope, sorry, but we make do. Back to the text. Homer's Agamemnon is arrogant, which makes him similar to the many Bronze Age kings whose monuments invited the mighty to look upon their works in despair. Take the King of Mari, Dunlim, 1820 to 1798 BC, who describes himself in an inscription as, quote, opener of canals, builder of walls, erector of steles proclaiming his name, provider of abundance and plenty for his people, who make whatever is needed appear in his land, mighty king, magnificent Ute, unquote. No doubt Agamemnon had an equally high opinion of himself, but he was no autocrat. Agamemnon's kingdom was typical of the times. It was less a state than an estate. That is, it was essentially a big household. The royal palace had grand staterooms, but most of its space was devoted to workshops, storerooms, and armories. It was a manor that produced luxury goods for the Wanaks to trade or give as gifts. Raw materials for the workshops were siphoned off the king's subjects as taxation. More importantly, from the military point of view, the palace produced bronze breastplates and arrowheads, manufactured and maintained chariots and stabled horses. The Wanaks controlled a corps of charioteers and bowmen and possibly one of infantrymen too. In any case, as powerful as he was, the Wanaks probably had no monopoly on the kingdom's military force. The royal writ was strongest on the king's landholdings, centered around his palace. The rest of the territory was run by the local bigmen, or basiles, each no doubt with his own armed followers. The Wanaks could muster an army and navy out of his own men, but for a really big campaign, he would need the support of the basiles. Yes, basiles. In short, the Wanaks was only as strong as his ability to dominate the basiles, be it by persuasion or force. And he had better things to do with his time than learn the rebus-like system for recording Greek that we call Linear B. Homer takes a lot of criticism from scholars who cite the total absence of the epics of the Linear B tablets. But Linear B was strictly used for administrative convenience. Unlike Hittites or Egyptians, Mycenaean Greeks did not put writings on their monuments, boundary markers, wall paintings, or seal stones. So a Wanak such as Agamemnon was no more likely to know Linear B than Queen Victoria was to know shorthand. But one text the king might have learned was lines of poetry sung by bards at palace feasts. Mycenaean art shows that bards predated Homer by centuries. Poetry offered the possibility of immortality. Agamemnon already had honor, power, and glory as a scepter-bearing king. The term is Homer's, but the royal scepter was already a symbol of power in Sumer, 2,000 years before the Trojan War. Agamemnon was a man of many possessions, but now he wanted more. Greece's pulse quickened as the heralds of the Wanaks made their rounds to call the other kings into action. Agamemnon's peasantry had to look enthusiastic as the king's men rounded them up to serve. The Greek monarchs were no doubt blunter. Troy was an impregnable fortress, and only a fool would try to take it. No wonder Homer says that Odysseus kept Agamemnon and Menelaus cooling their heels on rocky Ithaca before he agreed to join their expedition. I turned to the wrong page. But in the end, fear, greed, glory, and the gods won out. So they came to Aulis, the best of the Greeks, as perhaps they had never come together before. There was Nestor, the grand old man of Pylos, and most eloquent of the Greeks, Odysseus, the canny lord of Ithaca, Zakynthus, and other islands. The canny lord of Ithaca, Zakynthus, and other islands. Sorry, the reading was a bit off there. Philotetes, Greek archer from the rugged country around the mounts Ossa and Pelion. Menelaus, Agamemnon's brother and king of Sparta. Diomedes, the champion of the great war cry, and the youngest general in the Greek army, who led a contingent from Argos and Tiryns. Ajax, son of Telamon, of Salamis, the so-called Greater Ajax, known as the Greeks' bulwark, if not their brains. Ajax, son of Oileus of Locris, called Lesser Ajax, a hot-blooded bruiser who was spoiling for a fight, and the fearless Prostelius of Thessaly. A different group of men testifies to the prior Greeks' penetration of the Aegean. Idomeneus of Crete, the island that Greek arms had grabbed from the Minoans. Some of these names are quite awkward to read, and I'm not like Son, who has a grasp of Greek and Latin. Telepolemus, son of Heracles, a thug who had murdered his great uncle on the mainland and moved to Rhodes, and men from the other Dodecanese islands of the southeastern Aegean Sea. Finally, to return to the mainland, there was Greece's greatest warrior, a man known as the best of the Greeks, prince of the central Greek region of Pythia, leader of the fearsome unit of warriors called the Myrmidons, Achilles. I need a drink, excuse me. I forgot to fill up my bottle of water. 2 seconds. Okay, I am back. I apologize for how shaky that reading was for a bit there. Some of those names, as I said, were definitely throwing me a little. Maybe they are all fiction, but as a group they represent the Bronze Age art of war. Their hands were battle-wise with blood and calloused from stealing cattle. They could trample the enemy like a carpet under their feet, or calm the heart of a nervous army under attack. They knew horses like a stable hand and ships like a boatswain, but most of all they knew men and how to lead them. They could be as smooth as the ghee and honey paste with which Assyrians cemented rows of mud brick, or as rough as the gnarled limbs of an old olive tree. They knew which soldiers to reward with silver rings and which to punish with prison or mutilation. They could inspire the men to follow on foot while they rode in their chariots, and to compete for the honor of fighting bravely in their presence. They could break the enemy's lance or deceive him with words. They knew how much flour it took to feed an army and how much wood was needed to burn a corpse. They knew how to pitch camp or launch a fleet, how to debrief a spy or send out an informer. They could draw a bow and split a copper ingot like a reed, or hurl a spear and pierce the seam in an enemy's armor. They shrugged off mud and snow, towering waves or buckets of rain. They could appraise lapis lazuli with a jeweler's eye, or break a merchant's neck with a hangman's hands. They could court a milkmaid, or a princess. They relished ambushes after dark and noontime charges. They feared the gods and liked the smell of death. They knew war in all its bloody ways, but they shared a single dream: to set sail from Troy in ships with timbers creaking from the weight of plunder. Achilles says that he plundered no fewer than 23 cities in the Trojan War, and Odysseus proudly calls himself sacker of cities. It was a fitting motto for the Bronze Age way of war, and an inspiration for Agamemnon's commanders. Odysseus and Achilles echoed centuries of predecessors in late Bronze Age Anatolia. Shortly before 1400 BC, a Greek called Tarisia in Hittite, in Greek perhaps Atreus, landed on the Anatolian coast. He went on a spree of war and plunder through southwest Anatolia with 100 chariots and a force of infantrymen. Then he crossed the sea to carry out raids on Cyprus. Agamemnon's father was also called Atreus, so perhaps the men were kin. Nearly 200 years later, around 1250, a Luwian general named Piamaradu continually raided the territory of Hittite vassal kings in western Anatolia. Piamaradu had the tacit consent and perhaps the help of a Greek royal prince in Miletus called Tanoalgala in Hittite. This Greek might have been Eteocles, a Theban prince of myth, or maybe Teucer, as Greater Ajax's brother was called, Teucer. Each of Agamemnon's generals was the leader of a band of warriors. Greek for warrior band is laus, a common term in Homer. The warriors were bound by strongly personal ties. We see this, for example, in Homer's emphasis on the loyalty of the Myrmidons to Achilles. Linear B tablets refer to a group of royal officials as lowers, and to the commander of the laus as the man who assembles the warrior band. This latter is possibly Laertus in Mycenaean Greek, and some scholars think the name Laertus, Odysseus' father, is just a contraction of that word, whereas we and later Greeks tend to think of an army as an institution and war as a deployment of men and material. Homer and Bronze Age Greek tended to think of both in personal terms. For example, the classical Greek word for army, stratos, meaning encampment, and for war, polmos, means engagement of opposing warriors or troops. But both Homer and Linear B avoid these terms, preferring instead warrior band and war spirit, or war god, Ares. The army that gathered at Aulis, therefore, was in a real sense a collection of warrior bands and their chieftains. It reminds me a little of, well, the Fianna. The Fianna is essentially a war band of men, of which I was once a part. Typically the Fianna, or the Fians, I should say, were made up of young men who, in struggling to wait for their time of inheritance, particularly of the noble or elite branch, would go off and essentially cut their teeth and become men in raiding and leading men and plunder, typically going after cattle or fighting as mercenaries for whichever various kingdoms paid the most. It was also a collection of soldiers. Bronze Age documents tend to refer to the army as the infantry and the chariotry, but that oversimplifies. And this, I think, is probably Barry Strauss's primary area. I was looking it up later, and he primarily focuses on the history of warfare. A well-equipped army around 1200 BC had a variety of fighting men, including both heavy and light infantry, charioteers, archers, slingers, specialists in siege warfare, i.e. laddermen, sappers, which is a term for those who typically dig trenches and such. As well as, sappers was referred to those who would dig trenches, but specifically in siege warfare, I suppose it would be those who would build mounds for siegecraft or tunnel under the walls of a city. And operators of battering rams and siege towers, scouts, spies, trumpeters, and standard bearers. As a naval power, the Greeks also had ships, pilots, boatswains, and a variety of seamen as well as marines, able to wield long pikes in sea battles. The support personnel were not small in number. Elite positions were held by priests, diviners, physicians, who also doubled as veterinarians, scribes and heralds. The masses were made up of the carpenters, shipwrights, wainwrights, grooms, stable hands, herdsmen, butchers, cooks, wine, stewards, smiths, metalworkers, tinkers and slaves, to handle tasks of every variety, from farming to sewing to maintaining latrines. There might have been a few concubines and prostitutes, but with new sources of women beckoning to the east, it might have seemed unself-confident to bring many bedmates to Aulis. Aulis sits in a rocky hill at the foot of Mount Mesophion, which rises 3,350 feet over the Gulf of Euboea. Watchmen looked down from the mountain, and one day they would light one of the chain of beacon fire messages from Mount Ida to Argos, announcing the fall of Troy. At the shoreline below at Aulis, a Mycenaean town stood on a rocky ridge separating two harbours. Between them they made Aulis the best port in northern Boeotia, and Boeotia was the logical meeting place for the Greek fleet. The region sits midway between Mycenae, home of Agamemnon and Phthia, home of Achilles. Boeotia was a wealthy land, rich in warriors from the Trojan expedition, and Aulis faces east, where it looked out on a 3-day sail to Troy, when the wind was fair. So I think here I'm going to just pause for a moment and pull up a map, so you guys have a bit of an idea of what's whereabout we're talking. And I have a pretty nice one. Here we are. Whoa, that's big. So let me move myself to the side. Here we go. So if you guys look at Greece, which is on the east of this, or the left here, you can see Aulis underneath Boeotia. It's just above Athens and Ithaca. So this is where the Greeks would have met and formed. You can see some of the areas that he's talking about. You can see Mycenae, where Agamemnon rules, and Phthia to the north, past Thebes, where Achilles rules. So they would have all kind of come from here, and you can see it's quite, as he says in the book, it's quite central. I'm going to have to figure out a way to have my mouse on screen though, because I don't think you guys can see it. Because that would be a way easier way to show things, I think. If there's anyone watching who is a streamer who quickly knows how to get one's mouse on screen in OBS, please let me know. There's many things that I realize I have to learn how to do only as I stream. I think that's the fun part. There's always the audio, how to set up your filters and stuff. But then there's little things that you never even think about. You never really realize that it might be something slightly important. What I should do. Wait. I have an idea. How do I need to bring myself forward? Okay. 2 seconds. I have an idea. No, to point at things. What is the word I'm looking for here? I want like a stick that I can like put into my hands, attached to me, and then I can move it around and be like, okay, here is where I want you guys to be looking. Like I'm a teacher. Like I'm teaching you guys. I think that would be kind of funny. You know, I can do that stuff later. I can figure things out better. That's a good idea, though. I should definitely pursue such a thought. But I might leave this map up here while I read. I think it will help. Some people might maybe follow things. Back to the text. But the wind was famously not fair for the Greeks. Aulis was sacred to Artemis, goddess of the hunt. The royal Agamemnon was used to giving commands and thinking later. He had neither the cunning nor the patience of a good hunter. It is not surprising that he fell afoul of the deity. Homer says nothing about the incident. In fact, he implies that it never happened. But the tale of Iphigenia is preserved in other sources. Oh, is this... I believe this might be another thing that Sun read. Unless I'm misremembering things. Like the other Olympians, the goddess Artemis is named in Linear B texts. More intriguing, so was a certain priestess of the winds, keeper of a cult that might have been important to mariners like the Greeks. Stories differ as to how Agamemnon offended Artemis, whether by killing one of her sacred animals, by going back on a promise of a special sacrifice, or simply by bragging. The Greeks, like other Bronze Age nations, made substantial offerings to their gods. From oxen, sheep, and pigs, to wine, wheat, and wool. In any case, Artemis was angry, so she kept the Greek fleet bottled up in port by making the north wind. Boreas, blow. It is not unusual for Boreas to bluster for a 2-week spell in the summer. There is a powerful riptide at Aulis, which would have multiplied the effect of the wind. In order to appease the goddess and make the wind stop, Agamemnon is said to have coldly consented to the murder of his daughter, Iphigenia. Yes, now I'm going to quickly look up how to pronounce that name, so Sun doesn't stab me. Let's see.
Iphigenia.
Oh wait, I had to put on my headphones. I forgot, I took them off for a moment to check something.
Iphigenia.
Iphigenia. Iphigenia, there's a G there in that name. Ew. Well, I guess if that's what Google says. Iphigenia. In order to appease the goddess and make the wind stop, Agamemnon is said to have coldly consented to the murder of his daughter, Iphigenia. While unverifiable, the tale is plausible. Greece's trading partners in Syria and Canaan practiced child sacrifice, especially in moments of extreme stress. Mycenaeans borrowed many customs from the Near East, as did the Minoans, and the Greeks and Greek myths are full of stories of child sacrifice. Archaeology does not prove the myths true, but it has found impressive circumstantial evidence. On Crete, near the Palace of Knossos, excavators discovered the bones of 4 children, all in perfect health. 2 can be identified by their teeth as having been around 10 years old. Their bones had been cut by knives, so I suppose maybe a little bit too late here, but I'll just put in a quick warning. We may have some descriptions of some ghastly things, in case that is not. I probably should have said that at the start of this paragraph, but if such things are difficult for you to read or are to listen to, feel free to mute me for a bit. What I might do is once this, I'll put in a little text, and when it stops, what should I call this text? We'll just call it text warning. I'm suddenly at a loss for thought for what to call it. Difficult section. Warning. Let's make this much smaller. Let's try 150. Okay. We'll just do this. So, as long as this is up, and hopefully I remember to take it off, you can take that as kind of a condition that we're reading something a little bit gruesome. Or perhaps tough to get through, if one finds such things difficult. Their bones had been cut by knives as much as animal bones are cut by butchers' cleavers. Is this a case of cannibalism? If so, was it part of a religious ritual? Another case comes from 4 miles away on the slopes of a mountain south of Knossos, near the village of Archanes. Here a temple was discovered, and inside were 3 human skeletons, 2 men and a woman. Some evidence, such as a bronze dagger and bone discoloration, a sign of death by blood loss, points to human sacrifice. Although not proof positive, the facts suggest human sacrifice on Bronze Age Crete. Admittedly, this evidence is Minoan and not Mycenaean, but Mycenaeans borrowed heavily from their predecessors. Did Agamemnon? Agamemnon desperately needed to regain the god's favor because he faced a problem that was as much political as meteorological. He knew as well as his men did that a good general has to have good luck. The longer the winds blew, the clearer it was that Agamemnon was unlucky. To galvanize his men and get the attention of the gods, Agamemnon might have wanted to do something bold. Enter Iphigenia. I forgot how to pronounce her name. Iphigenia. Iphigenia, that was it. I need to get better at certain things. Legend has her come from Mycenae, riding with her servants on a mule cart, a common Bronze Age conveyance, and thinking that she had been summoned to her wedding. Oh wow, that's quite a rough realization. A different kind of altar awaited her. No doubt the girl had expected the feasting, music, and dance that marked a royal wedding. Imagine her, instead, heading for the sacrificial table, white-armed, veiled, dressed in the shimmering gown of a bride, as lithe as Artemis herself, and terrified by the sight of the empty space where there should have been an animal for the slaughter. By killing his own daughter, Agamemnon gave notice of his rootless dedication to the cause, thereby inspiring and terrifying others. Did he feel remorse as he first washed his hand, then pulled out the knife that hung by his sword scabbard, next lifted the bronze blade to the girl's throat, and finally saw the blood spurt out? Or did Artemis save Iphigenia at the last minute and substitute a deer, as some versions of the story go? All we know is that the wind stopped blowing. Maybe that whole sacrifice thing has a point. We should try that next time there's like a storm. And so the king of Argos, and of many an isle, inspected his navy. The thought may not have occurred to him, but Agamemnon was looking at one of the glories of ancient Greek civilization. It was technological, it was bloody, and it was new. It was as revolutionary in military affairs as the other Bronze Age invention, the chariot. The 1300s and 1200s were a great age of innovation at sea. The Greeks of that era were the first sea power in history on the continent of Europe. They may have picked up the know-how of shipbuilding and sailing from Aegean islanders, especially the Minoans on Crete, themselves great seafarers. But the Greeks established a navy in the harbours of the mainland, and they invented a new ship, the galley. The galley is an oared wooden ship, built for speed and used mainly for war or piracy. Mycenaean galleys were light and lean. The hull was narrow. Ooh, 2 seconds. Excuse me, somebody wanted to chat. Hello, Clever. How are you? Are you doing well? Having a nice day. Thank you for joining us. I'm learning how to play EU3. Oh, Europa Universalis, is it? I've never played that. I wanted to get into 4 because it looks quite fun. Is it going well? It seems like one of those games that like any Paradox game that is quite tricky. I don't know if it's maybe like CK2 at all in many ways. We're currently continuing reading about the Trojan War. I went with 3 because mechanical differences and it runs better on my laptop. I understand. For a long time, Clever, I had to use a basic laptop to game, and let me tell you, once I made my PC, the difference was mind blowing. I could actually run like somewhat decent games and not have to worry. 4 gigabytes of RAM. Is that yeah, I think that was similar to mine. And then I broke it. it could at least run things decently, and then I broke it, and then I had to use like an 11 or 12-year-old Apple laptop. So not fun. But I understand that difficulty of needing to sacrifice certain games. Like after a certain period in CK2 or even Stellaris, like that game just would not tick. It just wouldn't run. So I'm learning mechanics and the history of the states of Burgundy. Nice. That's the cool thing about those games, is they get you interested in certain areas and certain time frames, and you can learn about them. You go learn about like what actually happened, and then try and like recreate that in game, or completely go ahistorical. Back to the text. The galley is an oared wooden ship, built for speed and used mainly for war or piracy. Mycenaean galleys were light and lean. The hull was narrow, as hydrodynamics dictated, and straight and low, to cut down on wind resistance to ease beaching. A pilot stood in the stern and worked on a large, bladed, single steering oar. Incidentally, Homer gets this Bronze Age detail right. In his day, galleys used the double-oared rudder. The hull was decorated with a painted set of eyes in the bows, and probably also with an image of the ship's name, such as a lion, griffin, or snake. On the stem post was a figure head in the shape of a bird's head. The galley was so successful that its form remained standard in the Mediterranean throughout Roman times, but Bronze Age galleys lacked one refinement that marked their classical Greek and Roman descendants: the ram. The ram wasn't invented until centuries later, possibly by Homer's day. Bronze Age naval battles were decided not by ramming, but by crews wielding spears, arrows, and swords, and engaging the enemy either from a cautious distance or up close in a hand-to-hand free-for-all. The galley could be sailed, but the most reliable way to go fast was to row. The most common galley at Aulis was probably the pentaconter, a 50-oared ship about 90 feet long and 25 rowers sitting along each side of the hull. At Aulis there would have been 20-oared ships, each with 2 files of 10 rowers on the hull, estimated at 25 feet long. Bronze Age Greeks had an advantage in sea battles because of their navies and their know-how. Like today's missiles, airplanes, or tanks, the galley provided strategic mobility. As in modern warfare, the key to much of Bronze Age fighting was to get there firstest and with the mostest. A well-run fleet allowed a king to dominate a theatre of war by rapidly moving his men and material from place to place before the enemy did likewise. And Mycenaean fleets were well run indeed. The king's men drafted rowers from the towns of the realm. The rowers were paid sometimes in land allotments, and their families were looked after while they were at sea. They deserved it because, in addition to rowing, these men also doubled as marines, and, once the ships landed, as infantry. If we may judge by Bronze Age Egyptian Nile boats, Greek rowers had to endure harsh discipline. In Egypt, the whip and stick were routinely used aboard ships. Greek kingdoms also maintained professional seamen, such as pilots and pipers, who kept time for the rowers, as well as sail weavers and other specialists. Naval architects supervised teams of skilled woodworkers in building and taking care of galleys. It took 6 months for a team of a dozen carpenters, supervised by an architect, to build a Bronze Age galley, as an expert estimates. The frenzy of naval activity left the Greeks ship crazy. They gave their sons names like famous ship and fine sailing. Linear B tablets record the names of more than 500 rowers. Idle scribes doodled sketches of ships, while artists created more sophisticated images of the same on gems, pots, and pillars. And then there is Homer. If he composed his poems in the 700 BC, the maritime world that he describes, and describes in detail, is closer to that of the Bronze Age. The Iliad is an epic of land war, but sea power runs through the story like a golden thread. Without it, the whole fabric of the poem would unravel. Without the hollow ships, the Greeks could not have resupplied their army at Troy, nor raided the enemy cities around the coasts of the Troad and on the islands of Tenedos and Lesbos. They never could have gone to war with Troy at all. And the watery truth about Greece, that seafaring land, is brought home again and again by the most humble reminders in the least expected places. Like this ghostly image one of the men found on Crete, who might have been the victim of human sacrifice, was wearing a seal on a thong around his wrist, and carved into the stone was an illustration of a ship. There were a lot of men and ships at Aulis, but were there really 1,184 ships, the huge number cited by Homer, or 102,000 men aboard, as calculated by Thucydides, who lived around 460 to 397 BC. Thucydides is an Athenian general, the Athenian historian who was himself an admiral. And did the Trojans and their allies have 50,000 men, as Homer states? Hardly. The Hittites had 47,500 men at the Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BC, which is one of the largest Bronze Age armies mentioned in historical texts. No such figures for navies survive, but the great naval power of Urgarit was said in 1187 BC to have had considerably more than 150 ships. If true, then a Greek coalition around 1200 might have mustered hundreds of ships at Aulis, but not 100,000 men. Fielding an army that big in a protracted war seems beyond the means of a Bronze Age society. A more modest figure is in order, and here is a way to an educated guess. Troy's excavators have estimated a total population for the city of 500 to 7,500 people. In pre-industrial societies, typically little more than 20% of the population is males of military age, 18 to 49. So 1,125 to 1,700 Trojans. Combine this with Agamemnon's statement in the Iliad that the Greek army greatly outnumbers the Trojans who lived in the city of Troy. In fact, the ratio is greater than 10 to 1. The problem is, continues Agamemnon, that the Trojans have allies at their disposal, quote, who knock me far off my path and keep me from capturing the well-peopled fortress of Ilion, no matter how much I want to, unquote. On that reckoning, the Greek army was greater than 11,250 to 1,700 men. So a conservative estimate might calculate armies of about 15,000 men per side. To carry 15,000 men per side. To carry 15,000 men to Troy, the Greeks would have required 300 pentaconters, assuming every man rowed. Some of the ships might have been smaller than pentaconters, that is, 20 oared ships, and some might have been larger, that is, merchant vessels. So, quote, around 300, unquote, is a plausible estimate of the number of Greek ships that left Aulis for Troy. It is possible that the Greeks had some merchant ships at Aulis in spite of their apparent willingness to leave trade in the hands of the Canaanite ships and captains. The Ulu Burun shipwreck is suggestive of Greek priorities. When the ship sank off the southwest coast of Anatolia around 1300 BC, it carried everything from copper ingots to hippopotamus teat, but only one Greek product, weaponry, 2 sets of spears, swords, and knives. Yet merchant ships were so well suited for transporting men, animals, and supplies that the Greek army may well have bought or built some for the Trojan expedition. A Bronze Age merchant ship could carry as many as 250 men, which is no doubt why pharaonic Egypt used merchant ships to transport soldiers, horses, and chariots. Homer's Eumelus of Thessaly in central Greece brought his peerless mares to Troy, and he would surely have found a merchant ship convenient. Perhaps merchantmen were also used to carry arms and armour as well as a limited supply of food and water, but no more than a limited supply, because ancient armies expected to live off the enemy's land. The ideal was to fare like the army of Egypt's king Thutmose III, 1504 to 1450 BC, in northern Syria. After victory, his men found fruits on the trees, grain on the threshing floors, and vats overflowing with wine. They got as drunk as at a party at home in Egypt. Whether sobriety reigned or not, the day finally came to leave Aulis. At dawn, a favourable wind was blowing. The pitch-black hulls had been eyed and pawed and checked by hand for any holes. The gear was stowed, the horses brought on board, the fodder was found, and the men were ready. All that remained was for the chiefs to sacrifice to the gods. They set up an altar at a spring under a plane tree and led the bulls to the slaughter. Then, when everything was done, an ill omen appeared. This one reported in Homer. A snake, Sasa. If anyone here is a fan of Sasa the Hugh. Can't believe he appears in this. A snake crawled up the altar and onto the tree, where it found a sparrow and her 8 chicks in a nest on a branch, and killed them. Then the snake turned to stone. A rational explanation of the phenomenon might be that the beast died on the spot. In any case, only Zeus could have done it. Everyone knew it, and they were terrified. It took the seer Calchas, son of Testor, to break the spell. Imagine him wearing a long robe with a bay leaf wreath in his hair, and carrying a staff tied with the ribbons of the god Apollo, whom he served. He carried himself with the dignity of someone close to the gods, and with the caution of the men who had given King Agamemnon the bad news that his child would have to be sacrificed. Divination, predicting the future on the basis of natural phenomena, was common in the Bronze Age. Birds were important omens, especially in Anatolia, and so were snakes. The portent at Aulis meant, Calchas explained, that a long, hard war lay ahead. For 9 years they would struggle, but in the tent, absolute certainty would be their reward. The chiefs chose to accentuate the positive, final victory. And so at last, the chiefs boarded their vessels, and the fleet was off. The size of the expedition was extraordinary, but the act of sailing was common. Homer describes such a scene well. Then launch and hoist the mast, indignant gales, supplied by Phobos, fill the swelling sails. The milk-white canvas bellying as they blow, the parted ocean foams and roars below. Above the bounding billows swift they flew. When the wind fell, the men would row. They sat on benches in the long ships above along 2 open, well-ventilated galleries, with leather screens to protect their head, which stuck out over an open bulwark. They averaged 25 men on a side, and each of them pulled on an oar. The men's grain was stored in leather bags. Their water and wine were in clay jars or skin bottles. Their gear was under the benches. If challenged, the men would have to grab a shield, spear, and sword, and take on the enemy's boarding party, but they would not be challenged. They had the greatest navy in the world. It must be, fighting at sea must be so terrible. Like, I mean, obviously, fighting in any situation such as that of any of the melee combats must have been terrifying. But you know, especially if you're wearing armor and you fall into the ocean, there's a good chance that you're not going to have the time to get out of that gear, and you're just going to sink, like as if you were in cement shoes. Especially because those things would have been tied. They would have been well designed to spread the weight over the body, to have some weight on the shoulders and some on the waist, and they would have been tied in such a way as to allow for that ease of carrying. So I often wonder, you know, when men are lined up in battle and they're about to run into the shield walls and hit those lines, and there's that sense of unease and nervousness. How much more must that be heightened when one knows that one push or one misstep could send one into a watery grave? It must have been quite a fear. I, for one, would have liked to have been an archer. Back, if I had to do that, I'd just stand in the back and shoot my bow and arrow and be happy. Or a slingman. Or maybe like during the Byzantine times, one of those guys who operated the flame cannons, the Byzantine fire, the Greek fire. That must have been an interesting job. After leaving Aulis, the sleek hulls would have passed through the channel between the Greek coast and the island of Euboea, and then turned eastward, island hopping from the Sporades to Lemnos to Imbros, and from there it took only 20 miles on the bright sea for the black ships to reach Troy. So I can see Lemnos, Imbros. Here we are. So if we look at Aulis, we would see them sailing out of Aulis, looking at the map. We have Boeotia, Aulis in kind of central Greece. Sailing out of there, sailing out and up the Sporades to Lemnos, which is sort of, if you just go north from the Aegean Sea, just go right above the Aegean Sea, you can see Lemnos, and then over to Imbros, and then to Troy. The Greeks would have had a great deal to worry about when they got there. Finding the right landing ground, protecting themselves from the slings and spears and arrows of the Trojan army that would surely be there to await them, securing local sources of food, fodder and water, and winning some easy loot in order to keep the men happy. But there was one thing the Greeks would not have to worry about: the Trojan navy. Amazingly, despite its location by the sea and its economic dependence on maritime trade, Troy had no navy, or at least no significant one. This was more than a passing weakness. It was a major vulnerability for the Trojans. Because they had command of the sea, the Greeks were able to raid the enemy coast at will. If it had similarly possessed competitive naval power, Troy could have brought the war to the enemy with an offensive across the Aegean Sea into the Greek heartland. Without a fleet, however, the Trojans were continually stuck on the strategic defensive. Agamemnon might have felt like Hittite king Hattusilish III, who said that he could, quote, cast a glance at the enemy's country, but the enemy could not cast a glance back at him. And again, seeing many similarities to the Vikings, who, due to their speed and superior naval prowess, are able to hit and run and strike with sudden surprise all across England and Ireland and Scotland and many other parts of the world. Here's a paradox. Troy was a seaport that did not fight at sea. Founded by continentals looking outward to the sea, it became rich by offering sailors a foothold in the wind, but without developing its own navy. The Trojans fit the description of Bronze Age people of whom Thucydides says, quote, although they inhabited the lowlands, they were not seagoers, unquote. At least, not when it came to fighting at sea. The Trojans no doubt had boats, but not of the quality of the Greek warships, nor in large enough number to compete. For example, when Paris went to Sparta to bring back Helen, he had ships especially made for the trip. The builder was Phereclus, son of Tecton, and grandson of Harmon. Phereclus was a superb craftsman, described by Homer as someone who, quote, knew how to make things with his hands, many elaborate and skillfully crafted things. Indeed, his name means famous, son of the builder, and grandson of the joiner. Homer says, thy father's skill, O Phereclus, was thine, the graceful fabric and the fair design. For loved by Pallas, Pallas did impart to him the shipwrights and builders and the builder's art. Beneath his hand the fleet of Paris rose, the fatal cause of all his country's woes. You know, whenever I listen to Son reading, especially Pope's translation, I always love his flow, the style of his reading. I don't know if that's just, I'm trying to copy it a little there. I'm sure it has a very specific terminology for the inflections and rises, and our emphasis, I suppose, would be the correct word of the syllables. But I might ask him to be like, hey, can you show me? Can you, because I could see him having looked into that. I'd like to, if I'm reading poetry or reading Homer at any point, to know what the flow of the language should be. Phereclus built Paris well-balanced ships for his getaway. The implication is that the ships on hand in Troy were no match for Menelaus's fleet. Troy had little incentive to build a navy. Middlemen have no need to go abroad for plunder. Warships had little appeal to men who could garner wealth, glory, and security by breeding horses. Archaeology as well as myth makes the Trojans latecomers to the horse. Myth considers Troy's horses a gift from Zeus. Excavations show that the horses were not native to Troy, but arrived around 1700 BC, late by Near Eastern standards, after which horse bones abound in the ruins. Trojans took to the horses with the zeal of converts. Homer's Priam had horse stables in Troy, and a horse farm near the city of Abydos on the Dardanelles. Andromache feeds her husband Hector's horses grain and wine, while Pandarus goes one better by fighting on foot in order to spare his mounts from missing mealtime. Aww, that's actually adorable. That's so cute. That's so sweet. you can imagine like the stable boys getting the horse ready, putting it onto the chariot, and him running in and be like, hey, what are you doing? And they're like, what? He's like, no, stop. You need to fight. You need to fight. And he's like, no. It's lunch. It's dinner time. It's meal time for my boy. Go get him the finest grain. And then like everyone else he sees is in a chariot and they're speeding around, and he's just running along with everyone else. These were princes who could have rubbed shoulders with any. These were princes who could have rubbed shoulders with any age's blue bloods, including the horsey Hittites, Troy's powerful ally. And like the Hittites, the Trojans couldn't see beyond the silken mane. Landlocked in central Anatolia, the Hittites tended to imagine the coast as the edge of the world. Hittite kings boasted of extending their realm to the border of the sea, as if nothing lay beyond. Their treaty with Troy, for example, says nothing about ships, while it specifically mentions Troy's obligation to send infantry and chariotry to Hatti when needed. The horse was king, or so it seemed, but danger came by sea. According to Homer, a generation before the Trojan War, King Laomedon of Troy promised horses to Heracles in exchange for ridding Troy of a sea monster. Heracles kills the beast, but Laomedon reneged. The angry hero attacked the city and, quote, filled the streets with widows. True, Heracles had only 6 ships at his disposal, but Heracles' son Tlepolemus brags that his father destroyed Troy, and evidence from Ugarit supports his boasting. In a letter around 1200 BC, the last king of Ugarit, Amurapi, complained that an enemy did serious damage to his country with only 7 ships. The crews of Heracles' 6 ships would have amounted to just several hundred men, and they could not have taken a walled city like Troy. But the harbour town, farmhouses, and other unwalled settlements in the Troad would have been at their mercy. And who knows, pushed by Heracles' famous hot temper, they might even have found a weak point in the walls. Nor should we discount help from their friends within Troy. They needn't have been many. In fact, most Trojans might have winced at the sight of Mycenaean ships, given the tide of violence of Mycenaean culture. How many Mycenaean traders turned into raiders when, like Heracles, they were hoodwinked? Yet there were indeed Mycenaean merchants at Troy. In fact, the archaeologists have found so many Mycenaean pottery at the site, both imports and imitations made of local clay, that if we didn't know better, we might have thought the place was a Mycenaean colony, and not Troy. One of the most eloquent signs of Mycenaean commerce comes from a grave in a cemetery at Troy's harbour. It is a seal stone with a stylized face, mouth open in a wide grin. The style is typically Mycenaean, and maybe the seal was a trader's device used to mark his wares. Somebody at Troy did business with men like him. Someone, perhaps a Trojan, perhaps an immigrant, traded with the Mycenaeans for horses or textiles or slaves, and that person might have opened the gates to Heracles' men. Consider the Iliad's Antenor, that Helen be returned to them. A Trojan elder who was well disposed to the Greeks and who proposed that Helen be returned to them. When Troy was sacked, he was spared. Some say because he in fact opened the city gates to the enemy. I'm going to need to set that on a longer timer so I can make sure to see who it is. Oh, cry. Aw. Swy. Is it Swy? Cry? I'm not too sure. It's just me. Aw, thank you so much for showing up, and thank you so much for the follow. It means a lot. Thank you. Cry. Yeah, yeah. I wasn't too sure which way you'd wanted it pronounced. But thank you for showing up. How are you? Are you doing well? Welcome to the stream. I've been listening. Your voice is great. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I try and it's comfy. That's good to hear. I try to keep it nice and clear, and still kind of give both. Have it be in such a way that it is both relaxing to listen to if you are someone looking for ASMR, or still not so much leaning into the ASMR that it's impossible to enjoy the reading if you're here for the historical aspect. Who knows? Maybe someone who finds out that they like ASMR type stuff and they go searching for more soft voices. But thank you so much. Aw, cute emotes. I'm looking forward to giving ASMR a try. I'm just at work, so I need Googe ASMR. I often, actually at work, I didn't listen to ASMR much at work. I often listen to music, and I'm like jamming along, and sometimes I get weird looks, but screw them. Same. Yeah. It's yeah. I find I can get into a rhythm, and I actually do better work when I have something to listen to, than when I just have to sit in silence. I mostly listen to horror. Ooh, like creepypastas or stuff, or like audiobooks of horror stories. I wouldn't be listening to horror. I'm like I'd be looking for like upbeat or like smooth music. Just check. I think we're yeah, we're literally like a page or two from the end of this chapter. Yeah, creepypasta, rotten mango. I've never heard of rotten mango. I'm gonna have to look that up later. But I remember watching people like Mr. Creepypasta, Creepy Nick Pasta, or all of those channels that popped up when I was younger. Where were we? It's good. It's more about mystery and murders. Ah, okay. Yeah, listening to like podcasts and stuff about like unsolved cases, or like murder mysteries that have kind of like just general podcasts like about like horror stuff, or creepy ghost stories can be a lot of fun. Where were we? We were by developing land power to the exclusion of sea power. No, it's totally okay. I have no bother chatting away with people. I just try not to have too big of a break, or often I'll find myself flicking around and I'll suddenly lose my place. But no worries. I'm happy to chat. I use my book as a crutch so that I don't have to be entertaining. I'll slowly develop those skills. By developing land power to the exclusion of sea power, the Trojans made the smart choice, or so they thought. It may well be that the Trojans had enough warships to project their power into the nearby islands, but they could not fight off an armada like the Greeks. Trojan strategists might have reasoned that their land defences were sufficient to repel any invasion from the sea. Troy would not be history's only example of a state located on the sea but without a strong navy. Japan, okay, please, book, don't be too controversial with whatever you're about to talk about. Japan, for example, is an island nation that had superb infantry and cavalry, but never had a navy before the late 1800s. Japan was not a trading state, but history's records commercial powerhouses whose forte was maritime trade and yet had no navy. Consider the cities of the Hanseatic League of the late Middle Ages. Okay, thankfully it's not anything too bad. At its core, about 60 great merchant cities in the northern Europe, mainly Germany. They dominated trade in the Baltic Sea, but they had no permanent army or navy. Only in the face of a serious threat from Denmark in the 1360s did they put together a fleet, but that lasted only a few years, until Denmark was defeated. In the 1400s, the new nation-states of Northern Europe, such as Sweden and Poland, easily outmatched what little naval power existed in the disorganized league. Another case is the Netherlands. It was a great maritime trade in the 1650s, but it had only a small navy, and so it was battered by the English fleet. If the Dutch had strengthened their navy in time, New York might still be New Amsterdam, as it was until the English fleet seized it in 1664. Like Troy, the Netherlands and the Hanseatic League were rich and unrealistic. They all faced a similar temptation of putting their resources into productive or prestigious things instead of necessities. They were wrong. Agamemnon did not make the same mistake. The king of Argos and many an isle built a war machine for all seasons. Argos, a land that Homer calls horse nourishing, was a hothouse of chariots, while the islands were guarded by the Greek fleet. The Greek way of war was versatile, and it had been for centuries. Now, as Agamemnon sat on his flagship, his fleet of black ships crossed the billowing waves. On every stroke, as we may imagine, calloused hands of rowers strained at the wooden oars, while grooms whispered to the feathers' horses not to fear the sea. Slaves checked the chariots against any loosening by the waves, and the surge made one man sick while lifting another to reveries of gold. Warriors missed their wives, seers prayed to Poseidon, and a veteran seaman reached for a goatskin's slug of wine. As the ships advanced, the harpies of death flew ahead to scout the plain of Troy. And that ends that chapter. Let me see how long the next chapter is. But that was quite a nice read, I think. I still really enjoy how this author kind of weaves in the narrative of the Iliad alongside historical discussion. I know some people might roll their eyes at giving too much historical credence to talking about Agamemnon or Achilles or such, even though he seems to be able to point that actual historical texts mention similar feats as I recorded in the mythology. But I do think that even if they hadn't, that there's often some form of truth, although obviously highly mythologized in these types of oral traditions. Let me see how long this page is. 49 to 69. So that's about just under 20 pages, because the next chapter starts then. Oh wait, no, actually, hang on, let me check something real quick. Oh no, I thought that maybe the images that he has would... Do I continue? How long has it been? It's been a little bit over an hour and a half. Whoa. I think I've been doing a lot of talking. I'll take a sip of water though. I hope everyone's been enjoying the reading. An hour and a half. Yes. I am back, and yes, I did hydrate too. I also did a little bit of a stretch. Okay. Actually, I wanted to say very quickly, um, because it was done while I was away, thank you to Haru Mizuki for following, and thank you to a bipolar carp 123 for following as well. Poor that poor carp. He must be two minds at all times when, trying to decide where to swim to. That's such a dumb joke. Anyway, on to the next chapter. Chapter 3, Beachhead. Helios the sun, who sees everything and knows the gods, is beginning his ride in his 4-horse chariot, turning the sky a gauzy blue and the sea the colour of widows' tears. Gulls fly towards the cliffs of the Gallipoli Peninsula across the Dardanelles to the north, framed by the barren peaks of the islands of Imbros and Samothrace. The scene is completed by the brown hills of the island of Tenedos in the west, and in the east the rolling Trojan plain, with the long ridge of Mount Ida rising ghost-like in the distance, a pastoral scene as we might imagine it. Then the Greeks arrived. So you can see some of the islands that are mentioned here. Lemnos, right by Troy, the small island of Tenedos, Imbros, Samothrace, the Dardanelles, leading into the Sea of Marmara and into the Black Sea. The black ships fill the sea like horses at the starting gate. The land, in turn, is unclear at first. As the ships come closer, it reveals fields and scrub. The morning fragrance invigorates the men aboard the ship. If they weren't working at the oars, the Greeks might shout, echoing the cry of a Hittite king on the warpath, quote, "Behold the troops and chariots of the land of Behold, the troops and chariots of the land of Greece are coming." Across the water, even the toughest Trojan in his bronze armour might shiver at the flutter of the polished fir-wood oars, driving the armada like birds of prey onto the Anatolian shore. It is the moment of decision. But not of surprise. The Trojans have had plenty of warning, and their troops are poised to stop the enemy from landing on the fertile soil of Ilion. They were waiting, just as large numbers of Crypiot troops were waited for the sea-born Hittite invaders of King Shupilumia II. When they disembarked on the island, the beach is thick with defenders. Shupa Iluluima. Shuppiluliuma. So, when I say some of these names are a little difficult, Hittite specifically seems to be a branch of names that I do not want to show up anymore in this book. or maybe I do. It's the first time I hear that word. Yeah, it almost seems like the type of long names that you would hear in like Indian names for some reason. That's kind of what it reminds me of. Shuppiluliuma. Maybe it's like Shuppiluliuma. Anyway, I'm sure it sounds lovely when someone who actually understands the language reads it. The beach is thick with defenders. What Homer says of a later rallying of the Trojan forces would surely apply that day as well. Nations on nations fill the dusky plains. Men, steeds, and chariots shake the trembling ground. The tumult thickens, and the skies resound. Offshore lies part of the small Trojan fleet. The rest is guarding another possible Greek landing ground. The rowers sit ready, while archers and shield-carrying spearmen prepare for the unequal battle ahead. Although they have no hope of defeating the Greek navy, they can at least slow it down and ease the task of the Trojan shore defense. As they watch the enemy ships grow larger on the horizon, the Trojan on shore get ready too. The priests might have been doing what Hittite priests did before battle, hosting the enemy gods at a ritual meal of wine and slaughtered sheep, at which they blame the war on enemy aggression. The soldiers no doubt have more mundane tasks. Veterans may be checking their bow or tightening their shield straps, while the new men joke as if on an outing. Some might wish that they could reach under their breastplate and wipe off the sweat, while others don't even notice how sore their hands already are from clenching a spear. The Battle of the Beach is about to begin. Of this key event, Homer says only that a Trojan killed the first Greek to jump ashore, but the historian Thucydides, writing centuries later, reasoned that the Greeks must have fought and won a battle on their arrival on Trojan territory, otherwise they could not have set up camp. Hector, son of Priam, struck the first blow. Oh, we get Hector in here, nice. As we learn from the epic cycle, those non-Homeric early Greek poems about the Trojan War. Sorry, I should read that again. Hector, son of Priam, struck the first blow, as we learn from the epic cycle, those non-Homeric early Greek poems about the Trojan War. Hector was a great warrior, but a mediocre husband. He was strong, agile, fearless, dogged, and by turns self-centered and sensitive. Hector could remember how he had lifted his bride's veil on their wedding night to tenderly offer her a cup of wine, but could shrug his shoulders at the thought of the widowhood that awaited her thanks to his aggressive pursuit of glory in battle. Homer makes Hector an expert spearman who can handle a sword if need be, but he was probably an archer as well. Around 1225 BC, the ruler of a western Anatolian kingdom not far from Troy had his portrait carved in relief on a cliff. The king strides boldly with a spear in one hand, a bow slung over his shoulder, and a dagger tucked into his belt. What was good enough for him was probably good enough for Hector. I'm just going to turn that off, and we can see the nice stream flowing in the back. Homer's Hector is tall and imposing, with a streaming mane of black hair and a handsome face, and eyes that no doubt flash from time to time with his reckless and aggressive spirit. He was probably clean-shaven, and he might have kept his hair in a ponytail. He probably wore gold earrings, an embroidered kilt, and Hittite-style shoes with upturned toes. If Hector was uncomfortable beneath a bronze breastplate, he lacked the odour of someone permanently stained with sweat, since, unlike commoners, royalty took daily baths. Hector is a type well attested in the ancient Near East, the crown prince burning to prove himself as a warrior. He knew that the only way to show that he was no longer a boy was to lead armies and give commands. A Hittite king told his young Babylonian counterpart that unless he led an armed raid into enemy territory, and soon, people would say that, like his father, the Babylonian was all talk and no action. Hector, by contrast, had an old fighter for a father, who advised caution. Old King Priam, white-haired and scratchy-voiced, confined to the city rather than the battlefield he once strode, still had the power of command. Priam was shrewd, self-controlled, and an old hand at the ways of war as it was waged in the Bronze Age. It was under his leadership, no doubt, that the Troy had put together an alliance and a strategy. Priam knew that Troy's best policy was defense, and that the farther the Trojans fought from the city walls, the better. Priam might have known the words of the Hittite king who said that the alternative to fighting in the open was risking suffocation in the crushing embrace of an enemy siege. The preferred option was to defeat the enemy on the beach as he tried to land. Should that fail, the Trojans would fight the Greeks on the plains of Troy, keeping them away from the city. If that tactic should not work in turn, then they would fall back to the anti-chariot trenches and palisades that protected the lower city, with the great walls of the citadel themselves as the final refuge. But it would never come to that. Not if the gods showed Priam the favour that they always had in the past. The storm god, Zeus to the Greeks, held Priam and his people closer to his divine heart than he did any other king or country on earth. Known in Anatolia by such names as Tarhunt or Teshub, the storm god was one of the chief deities of the Trojan pantheon. Priam was a favourite of his in no small part because the king knew that the gods helped those who helped themselves. Priam was not only intelligent, but brave out of all proportion to his years. He was so bold and decisive that even an enemy marvelled at Priam's iron heart. No one in the region was more blessed with wealth or sons than Priam. And then the Greeks came. The Trojans would surely have learned about the Greeks' approach from signal flares sent up by their friends on the nearby islands of Imbros and Tenedos. Allies were expected to serve as border guards and watchmen, as Hittite treaties often state. The use of torches for military signalling goes back at least as far as Mesopotamia in the 1700s BC. That same era is full of references to the importance of intelligence to warfare. The city of Mari had an intelligence bureau, and it may have been headed by an official with a wonderful name of Little Nat. The Trojans may well have taken a leaf from the same book. Homer has the Trojans employ lookouts, perhaps like the coastal watchers of this kingdom of Pylos, attested in the Linear B tablets. One of the Trojan lookouts was Hector's brother, Polites. He was a fast runner, and no doubt had excellent vision. Information that he provided would surely have been welcome, even though the Greeks had hardly kept their approach a secret. On the way to Troy from Aulis, the Greeks seem to have stopped first at the island of Skyros, and sacked it. So let's pull up the map again. So we can see Skyros in the center, between the words Aegean and sea, right next to Euboea. So they would have sailed around Boeotia, that kind of peninsula there, right up and sacked that island. If there's anything to the epic tradition that Achilles' mother had forced him as a boy into a humiliating hiding place on Skyros in a girl's clothing in order to dodge the war, which she foresaw, then this would have been sweet revenge for him. When the Greeks attacked, I'm going to have to look that up later because that sounds like a hilarious story. Big bad Achilles, forced by his mother. That reminds me of a great story. Supposedly of Fionn McCool. There's many different treatises or stories. Some make him a giant, some make him just a very, very, very powerful man. But I believe it was Fionn McCool. But the making of the causeway, the Giant's Causeway in the north of Ireland. So supposedly, it had been created due to Fionn McCool. He saw another giant, a Scottish giant known as Benador, I believe it was, or maybe Benadonner, something like that. But essentially, they were challenged. They were shouting at each other all the time. In some stories, it even says that Fionn plucked a great rock and threw it into threw it at him, creating what was known as, I believe, which island was it? Was it the Isle of Man? Was that how the Isle of Man was created? Or maybe that was how Loch Ness was created. Sorry, I'm a little unsure on how the story goes. But anyway, they start constructing this bridge, and the Giant's Causeway is basically a series of, I believe it's basalt, columns. That looks really cool, I will say. As they start constructing, one version of the story says that Benadonner was a lot bigger, a lot bigger than Fionn realized as he got closer. Now, in another story, it states that he defeats him. But another story, the one that I kind of just find funny. So he runs to his wife, and he's like, "Oh God, this guy is big. He's going to kill me." So his wife concocts a plan. and she disguises Fionn as a baby and puts him in a little cradle. So when the Scottish giant arrives and he marches to the house and is confronted with by his wife Scythe, he demands to see him, but only her and his baby is there. So he comes in and he looks at this baby, and he sees why this baby is huge, and thus his father must be even a giant among giants. And he runs back across the Giant's Causeway and destroys the causeway as he goes, for fear that Fionn himself would chase him over. It's a very funny little story. I think that's something I would like to do, is because you can tell I'm a little bit uncertain on some of them. I think reading some Irish mythology and Scottish mythology and other areas would be very, very interesting. I have a really great book on Irish gods that I think would be a really good read, but it's quite long. That's interesting. There's other various aspects where, as I was saying, there's some areas where they say that Fionn rips out some rocks and throws it at him, but misses widely. And I think it's the Isle of Man he supposedly created. The thing is that on the Giant's Causeway, there's a similar basalt like structure in a part of Scotland, I believe, where it might have been believed that this would have been connected. So yeah, it's a fun little story. Sorry, I kind of got sidetracked there. When the Greeks attacked en route to Troy, the Screans would not have had a chance against so big a force. In addition to settling Achilles' private score, the attack would have been a moral builder for the men, who could thrill to their first victory. It was also an experiment, allowing the generals to see how their untested army might perform. Then, coming northeastward, the Greeks landed on Lemnos. The rugged island had unexpected bounties, such as its clay-like soil with medicinal properties and its sweet red wine. On Lemnos, the Greeks lived like Olympians, feasting on beef and chugging wine by the cupful. The more they drank, the more they boasted. Each Greek could take on 100 Trojans. No, 200. It was a last binge for the boys, but the generals had to think about strategy. Lemnos was a stepping stone on the route from northern Greece across the Aegean to Troy in the Dardanelles. Lemnos was also a potentially crucial source of supplies for any Greek camp at Troy, as well as a potential market for any captives whom the Greeks would want to sell as slaves. It was essential to secure Lemnos before going on. But the price of doing business on Lemnos was that it gave the Trojans time to prepare. And then some. The epic tradition outside Homer records that after Lemnos, the Greeks took a wrong turn. Instead of landing at Troy, they ended up about 75 miles to the south on the Aegean coast of the region known as Mysia. Mistakenly thinking they had reached Troy, they attacked the forces of King Telephus. The king's army bloodied the Greeks, but in the end, Telephus was wounded by Achilles. Myth says that only a scraping of the wood by Achilles' spear could heal the wound, an unusual example of the herbal medicine practiced by the Greeks. Achilles' gigantic spear was made of ash wood, and boiled ash bark makes a good poultice to apply to a wound. In exchange for the medicine, Telephus showed the Greeks the way to Troy. Whether or not there's any truth, it underlines the fragility of early navigation and of early military intelligence. If the tale is true in some manner, It means that the Trojans had even more time to prepare. They were indeed ready for the invader. So I believe Mysia is kind of down, as he says, south. So if we have Troy, I believe around where the Hermus River on that map, kind of south Anatolia, I believe that's where Mysia is about. Maybe even... Let me think. No, I believe it's north of the Hermus River. Yeah. Yeah, just under that kind of the part where Troy is that juts out. That's where, kind of just there, just under there is where Mysia is, if I remember correctly. They had assembled a great coalition. Some of the allies came from Europe, Thrace and Macedonia, but most were Anatolian. Alliances were the bread and butter of Anatolian politics, and many figure in Hittite texts. So Homer lists So Homer's list of Troy's Anatolian partners is historically plausible. First came the Trojans, or more accurately, the Trojans and the Dardanians, to refer respectively to the populations of the Trojan plain, and to its south, the fertile middle valley of the Scamander River, Aeneas's country. Next came the men from other places in the Troad, such as Abydos, Arisbe, and Zelia. Then there were regions beyond the Troad, namely Mysia and Phrygia, due east, Paphlagonia on the Black Sea, Maeonia to the south, in the Hermus River Valley, Caria the farthest south, in the Meander River Valley, and Lycia in the southwestern corner of Anatolia. The allied army might also have included Hittites, perhaps referred to by Homer as Halizones from Halub. So just as they had promised in the Alexandru Treaty, the Hittites might have sent infantry and chariotry in Troy's moment of need. Although surely not as many as Troy would have liked, given the Hittites' bigger problems closer to home. Now I actually, and we can see some of the mentions here, but I believe I have an image that shows... It shows some. I think I can pull that out later. Or no, you know what, we'll show that map as well. We have Troy. Oh, that's big. Troy and the Trojan plain. It's way bigger than I thought it would be. Oh no, wait, hang on. That's not the one I wanted to have open. I wanted to pull in the Troad. That's the one. So we can see some of the areas that he mentions to the north: Abydos, Sestos, Arisbe, and Mysia there, right? Actually, right where I said I think it was. Hey, look at me being smart. It's not like I looked at these maps a few hours ago. Yes, this gives us kind of the idea of the closer area around Troy, known as the Troad. I feel like I'm looking at a Lord of the Rings map. Especially all the strange names. Thebes under Plakos, Lyrisnus, Mount Ida, Pedus, Gulf of Edremit. All these makes you wonder where the bad guys are, you know, like all the orcs. Oh, I bet like the north's really snowy and it's where the Vikings happen to be. Oh, and a big plain with a big river where all the people are. Have you guys ever seen that the Game of Thrones map, or of what's the main area called again? I forget. But it's just Ireland and England stacked on top of each other. That's all it is. I think it's Ireland flipped around, like upside down. And then it's King's Landing. No, King's Landing is a place. Yes, hang on. I will show that because it's very interesting when you realize Game Thrones. Now it's not exactly Ireland. It's a little section. Westeros, that's what it was called. I couldn't exactly remember. And this image here shows it perfectly. Because there's a little bit yeah, talking about the whole map. My bad. I couldn't remember the name. But this image shows it very nicely. Look, it's basically just Ireland flipped upside down and with a little added on to what is now the south. And then you have the bottom of England. Like I when I saw it, I kind of caught it straight away. Well, not straight away. Once I actually like started reading the books and I looked at the maps, I was like, this looks familiar. Um, you know, some people put a lot of work into the map. Some people just go, I'm just gonna flip it around. But I think it does provide a very cool, and obviously he's changing a lot of like adding mountains in certain places and deserts in other areas. And then I think that's not even showing all of Winterfell because I think after this part of England, it's just massive. It's just a massive like landmass, not really tied into England or Ireland at all. It just kind of becomes its own thing. But it is interesting how there's a very clear connection there. Anyway, back to the book. Referencing IRL. I mean, that's more than referencing. I think that's literally just like he just flipped Ireland upside down and flipped it, um, and then just added on a bit of land. And it was like, yep, that's like the majority of Westeros. That's where all like the people are, all the kingdoms. But it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool to think that, you know, my I never watched the show. I've read the books up to the last book. I haven't finished that. I kind of just got tired because I read like all of them except the last one in a span of about like 3 weeks. Kind of sped through them. Um, so I'll reread it or I'll finish that off sometime. But I know I've heard he's getting places with the next book. But I have heard that the series, the TV series, was not the best. It was quite. I heard that it ended very badly. That it was fantastic, and then it was a bit poor. Still, Troy had assembled a formidable alliance. Putting it together was no doubt a tribute to Priam's diplomacy and his purse, because all business between Bronze Age kings had to be greased with gifts, and they had to be top of the line. For example, in the 1500s BC, the Amarna letters are full of such gifts of gold and lapis lazuli jewelry, horses, chariots, pieces of silver, and women. Homer cites gold and silver cups or ingots, bronze tripods, embroidered robes, fine jewellery, weapons, armour, heirlooms, vintage wine, mules, horses, and beautiful women. And it was an ancient custom to repay each gift with another gift, to say nothing of the lavish entertainment that had to be offered to ambassadors. All these benefactions were usually given with elaborate courtesy, but sometimes the veil was dropped, and a king just had to pay up. And pay big. Priam might have remembered, bitterly, the Egyptians' claim that the Hittite king had stripped his kingdom of silver to pay the allied troops who had fought at Kadesh. Leading Troy's allied army fell to Hector. On the eve of the Greeks' arrival, He probably mustered the men outside the city, perhaps at the hill of Baetia, which Homer mentions as a place where the Alliance drew up its troops. It was a multi-ethnic force, so varied in fact that it was a cacophony of languages, as Homer puts it. I'll lurk for now. I need to get coffee and breakfast. No worries, no worries. Enjoy your breakfast. Have a nice one that fills you and keeps you going for the day. And yeah, the next books, but I don't recommend watching the series anymore. I'll watch some of it because I heard that it is good. I'll just accept that it stops in the middle of the story, just like the books so far. But enjoy. As Homer puts it, such clamour rose from various nations round, mixed was the murmur, and confused the sound. The groups camped separately, and no doubt fought by national unit, as the Greeks did. Yet in order to cooperate operations, Troy's commanders must have come up with a few shared words of command, or some sort of lingua franca. Each nation's army was organized by types of troops, size of units, and hierarchy of commanders, as was standard in the Bronze Age. Such details of military groupings survive in Hittite, Mesopotamian, and Linear B texts, but the clearest picture comes from Egypt. There the army was divided into infantry ranging from 5,000 men divisions to 10 men squads. The basic tactical unit was a platoon of 50 men, 5 squads. In turn, grouped into a company, 5 platoons, and a host, 2 or more companies. The chain of command ran down from the pharaoh to the generals, to combat officers, and to the ordinary men. Alongside infantry units were chariot units and elite soldiers, as well as, when needed, naval units, garrison commands, and foreign troops. No more than glimpses survive of the force structure of the armies of Troy. The Iliad mentions 50 men Trojan platoons and 100 men Greek companies, and the Linear B tablets lists what might be military units, ranging from 10 to 70 men, in multiples of 10. Despite differences, no doubt many differences, these armies and Egypt's probably were similarly composed. Military logic dictated a number of common practices among Bronze Age armies. For instance, several days before the Battle of Megiddo in 1479 BC, Pharaoh Thutmose III held a war council with a small group of officers, who then passed on the plan to the entire army. On the day the Greeks came, Hector undoubtedly behaved similarly. He talked over the battle plan with the allied commanders, and they in turn sent the word to their men, each in his own language. That first day at Troy, each general is likely to have rallied his men with a pre-battle speech, which was already an ancient tradition. King Hammurabi of Babylon, 1792 to 1750 BC, for example, knew how important it was before a battle to visit his men in camp and make them, quote, happy with words. Whenever his Hana warriors, tough nomadic tribesmen, marched to Babylon, Hammurabi had them enter the city, where he reviewed them in parade, and then ate with them personally. Thutmose III addressed his army before Megiddo. Hector's words on a later occasion are typical of such speeches. Death is the worst, a fate which all must try, and for our country 'tis a bliss to die. The gallant man, though slain in fight he be, yet leaves his nation safe, his children free. Entails a debt on all the grateful state. His own brave friends shall glory in his fate. His wife live honoured, all his race succeed, and late prosperity enjoy the deed. Courage was another theme among these speeches, and honour and the need to prove oneself as a man. Be men is how Hector and Agamemnon each goads his soldiers. They were speaking a language that would have resonated in Anatolia. Hittite soldiers swore oaths to be loyal to their commander, to help them, gods otherwise, they swore. They would dress like women and turn in their arrows for spinning needles, and they often mocked their enemies not only as women, but as donkeys, cattle, or dogs. To any women listening, I'm just reading a book, don't be angry with me. A good general tailored his talk to the audience. For instance, on the eve of battle, Agamemnon knew whom to compliment and whom to shame. To the first group, he said things like, "Ah, were the gods but breed in all the rest, such souls as burn in your exalted breast." Slackers, on the other hand, were blasted in this manner. "Inglorious Argives, to your race a shame, and only men in figure and in name." Bucking up the army was easy. The civilians were another matter. As the soldiers poured out of Troy and gathered on the plain, the news of invasion must have gotten out. The people of Troy, no doubt, reacted in various ways. Some of them were determined, some of them were terrified, and all of them were suddenly alert because the Greeks were coming. They turned away from their oxen on the plain or from the wool on their loom and scanned the horizon, waiting for the black ships to appear. Some of them surely cursed Helen for bringing an invasion down on them, and some of them swore by the storm god of the army, the first god of Troy according to the Hittite text, that they would support their troops until they drove the invader back into the sea. They, the Trojan men who served King Priam, who was good at the ashen lance. Others worried that first the Greeks would pen them up like pigs in a sty, then the enemy would take the city, killing the Trojans on the spot, or dragging them off as slaves to the island or to far-off Greece. Bitter cries come from the walls of cities when the land is invaded, as a Mesopotamian text sums up civilian morale. The Greeks would not enjoy the advantage of strategic surprise on their landing, as they had to be certain to choose a good place to land. One of the keys to executing a successful landing is disembarking where the enemy is weak. Geography made this hard to do. There are few beaches on Troy's Aegean shore between Cape Sagium and the Trojan harbour at today's Bezic Bay, about 7 miles to the south, and those beaches lay under steep cliffs, perfect for defenders. That left the harbour itself, and the bay, which in late Bronze Age stretched southwards from the Dardanelles nearly all the way to the city of Troy. I think now would be a good time to pull up the map of the Troad if we're watching, so we can see Troy and we can see this harbour as well as this long kind of bay area. Today, that bay no longer exists, having been silted in by the flow of the Scamander and Samiosis rivers. In the late Bronze Age, the west side of the bay offered a tolerable, if not ideal, landing ground. The place was marshy and could be reached only by entering the Dardanelles, with its treacherous wind and currents. There was a much better harbour to the south, at Bezic Bay, but it was defended by a fort on an overlooking hill, and surely the Trojans would be dug in there. Where, then, did the Greeks land? Homer offers no clear answer, but the clues in his text point to the west side of the Bronze Age bay. The best Hellenistic and Roman sources agree. Modern experts are divided. Some argue that Greeks would have gone for the better harbour at Bezic Bay, that is, the Trojan harbour, but a bloody landing loomed large, and near-term gain usually trumps long-term planning, so the Greek high command is likely to have opted to land at the Bronze Age bay. No matter where they landed, the Greeks surely got command of the Trojan harbour eventually, and that gave them access to supplies, and perhaps income from ships that stopped there, while denying the same to the Trojans. The Trojans no doubt positioned their army between the two bays, and moved when they got word from their lookouts. If the Greeks were lucky, the Trojans moved slowly. The Greeks sorely needed to be lucky, because their leaders had underestimated the enemy. The Greeks so outnumbered a contingent from the city of Troy that Agamemnon was confident of his ability to crush them. but he seems to have grasped neither the size nor the strength of Troy's coalition army, at least to judge by his later complaint about Troy's unfair edge in allies. If the dictum is true that in order to win, an attacker needs to outnumber a defender by a ratio of 3 to 1, then the odds seemed to favour the Trojans. But the Greeks had 3 advantages when it came to grabbing a beachhead. Their ships were, as Homer says, horses of the sea, fast, mobile, and even with just their half-decks, serving as raised platforms from which to throw down spears and arrows on the Trojans below. The Greeks were experienced at making fighting run-ups onto the beach. The Trojans had little practice in such operations. The Greeks knew how to jump down onto shore rapidly while holding up a shield against enemy arrows, and how to land the ships in formation that would give their archers maximum protection. The terror of the ships also gave the Greeks a psychological edge. According to Homer, the unprecedented armada drove Priam's son-in-law, Imbrios, from his home at Peadaeum back behind the walls of Troy, and, as an ancient Athenian general would note on a later occasion, it was downright terrifying to face the onslaught of enemy ships coming right at you in the surf. But the most important Greek resource was the quality of their infantry, the backbone of their land power. The spear and the sword were their main weapons. To be sure, Agamemnon was careful to include some contingents of archers and slingers, no doubt remembering Anatolia's reputation as bow country. But his main answer to Anatolian superiority in chariots and archers was the phalanx. It was a primitive phalanx with neither the advanced armour nor the esprit de corps of the classical phalanx. But by the standards of the Bronze Age, it was formidable in relative terms, cohesive, heavy-armed, and potent. I do love that in constructing the Macedonian phalanx, King oh god, I've suddenly drawn a blank. I can't believe this. King Philip, that's who. I thought to myself, not Alexander, because it wasn't Alexander, but then Alexander was all I could think about. King Philip II of Macedonia, Alexander's son, in developing the phalanx, basically just went, well, what if we got a really long stick? Like, I know everyone else has spears, and those are pretty long, but what if we made oars really long? And then he conquered Greece, and the Illyrians and the Thracians, and then his son conquered most of the known world at that time. Shows you the power of a stick. Of course, the companion cavalry were just as important, as well as the various other parts of that army. Where was I? The Greeks fought in some way like the Shardana troops, whose arresting images stare out of us from Egyptian carved reliefs of the 1200s and early 1100s. The Shardana were foreigners who served in their own units in the Egyptian military, that is, when they weren't busy attacking Egypt in their longships. As the relief shows, the Shardana fought with swords and spears, but not bows. They wore short kilts, carried round shields, and wore horned helmets. Curving horns, sometimes with a disc-topped spike between them. The Shardana served as Ramses II's bodyguard. The Greeks were not Shardana, although just who the Shardana were is unclear. But like them, they were experts in fighting at close range, and would appear that Greek soldiers too fought in this Egyptian way. So wait a minute, the Egyptians had a Praetorian Guard, well before the Praetorian Guard of the Byzantines, bringing in the Vikings to cover them, or their Vikings anyway. Recently, an exciting discovery was made in the British Museum. A painted Egyptian papyrus from the 1300s BC came to light in a storeroom. It had been in 1936, during the continuing excavations that followed the discovery in 1922 of the tomb of King Tut, Pharaoh Tutankhamun, and then forgotten. Although it is a fragmentary and not easy to reconstruct, the painting clearly shows a battle scene. There are at least 2 Greek warriors fighting alongside Egyptians against Libyans. The Greeks can be identified as Greeks because they wear boar-tusked helmets, a style mentioned in Homer, and because one of them is dressed in an ox-hide tunic, a style known to have existed in the Bronze Age again. The Libyans have bows and arrows. We had suspected a Greek presence in Tutankhamun's Egypt because Mycenaean pottery turned up in the 1930s excavation. Now we know that it was, at least in part, a military presence. It's very interesting how many details Homer seems to have, at least in ways, correct. Or at least, again, it seems to speak that for as far back as he was, he at least had aspects of truth in his writings, in his epics. To speak generally, what Greek infantrymen lacked in chariots and missiles, they made up for in unit cohesion and speed. Also, unlike the Shardana, the Greeks, or at least some of them, wore heavy armor. They excelled in fighting in thick formation and in letting well-armored champions take the lead. The Greeks were not deficient in chariot tactics, but their chariotry faced practical limitations. There was little good horse country in Greece, especially compared to Anatolia. I believe as well that was why Thessaly was so kind of renowned for their horsemanship, because I believe that area of Greece is a little bit more open. And it's why the Macedonians ended up developing such a strong cavalry, because they were in close connection with them. They weren't in the rocky area of southern Greece, where everything is very mountainous and heavy infantry is more valuable. There were only so many horses and chariots that could be transported by ship. It would be hard to feed and exercise these horses in the narrow coastal strip of their encampment, or to do maintenance on chariots in a camp far from home. Add to this the numerous references in Homer to Greek soldiers like Achilles, who were, quote, swift-footed, that is, strong and fast infantrymen, who attacked charioteers from the ground with spears and swords, and a picture emerges of a nimble and lethal Greek infantry capable of paying back the Trojans in kind. The Trojans were great charioteers, who would serve them well on the plains of Troy. The chariot was a multi-purpose vehicle, used for transport to, from, and around the battlefield, as well as for mobile fire support, and for sheer intimidation. The chariot was part tank, part jeep, and part armoured personnel carrier. Just as horses were near and dear to the heart of the Hittite great king, "Send me the stallion," writes King Hattushilish III to the king of Babylon, so they were beloved by Priam. In fact, he reared some of his horses with his own hand, just as Pharaoh Amenhotep II did. But the Battle of the Beach would not be a chariot battle. It would be a brawl, with ships constantly coming in and men disembarking, with Trojans running forward to stop them, and Greeks pushing against the Trojan line, and with missiles flying. Neither side could have maintained close order. The result would have been a melee, what Homer calls a dispersed battle, in which man took man, and close combat was decided by hand and might. After all, an amphibious landing on well-defended ground is one of warfare's most difficult maneuvers. The Athenian general Demosthenes reminded his men of this when they had to defend an outnumbered garrison against a Spartan landing by sea. The year was 425 BC, the place, an outpost in southwest Greece, and the conflict was the Peloponnesian War. Demosthenes told his men not to fear the Spartan numbers, because, as experienced seamen, Athenians knew how impossible it is to drive back an enemy determined enough to stand his ground. The Spartans failed that day in 425 BC. The Athenians pushed them back into the sea. No doubt the Spartans were every bit as tough as Agamemnon's men, but the sandy beach at Troy would be much easier terrain for the invaders than the rocky shore that faced the Spartans. And the Spartans were infamous landlubbers. Seaborne raids, however, were almost run-of-the-mill for Bronze Age Greeks. Bronze Age galleys could be run right up onto the beach, bow first, and that is surely what the Greeks did at Troy. This procedure generated speed and power, then backing the boat in, stern first. Most defenders would scatter at the sight of a crimson-proud ship bearing down on them. Discipline of the rowers and the skill of the pilot would be crucial. Some ships would hit the target, while others would fail. A first-rate pilot, like Phrontis, son of Onotar, who served Menelaus, must have been highly prized. Likewise, top-flight rowers, like the Phaeacians of the Odyssey, who were strong enough to muscle a ship half its length up onto the beach. Perhaps a case of heroic exaggeration. On each side, the commanders would have given the men their orders before battle. Arrows were the best way to cover the distance between ship and shore, so each army would try to get its best archers in position. Slingers would have done damage too, so if possible they would have been positioned within striking distance as well. The Greeks would be particularly vulnerable as they hit the beach, a point the Trojan officers might have emphasized. But Trojans had little experience in the amphibious operations at which the Greeks excelled. Both sides have made an effort to get their heroes to the fore, that is, the nobles. This was a sound tactic as well as realistic politics, because the heroes were better armed, better trained, and better fed than the common soldier. On the Trojan side, for example, a man like Euphorbus, son of Pathos, whose father was one of Priam's advisors, was taught as a boy the art of fighting from a chariot. The young Achilles, to take another case, was trained, according to Homer, by the hero Phoenix, and, according to myth, by the centaur Chiron. The Greek or Trojan infantryman, by contrast, might have been instructed in drill, like the Egyptian conscript, but in combat he might have gotten more use out of what he had learned in scuffles in the barnyard or back streets. Before embarking that morning, the Greek chiefs would have had to decide the order in which the ships would come into shore, because the harbour would be much too small for all the vessels to land at once. The commanders would have wanted the elite troops in the first wave, while also saving good men for the later stages of the battle. The Greeks might expect a quick victory over any Trojan ships in their way, but they could count on a tough fight afterwards. As the Greeks jumped off the ships, they would have faced what looked like a stockade of spears. The Trojans had the sun in their eyes, but if they could make out the details, they might have seen the images of lions, bulls, or falcons painted on the bows of the Greek ships. They would have heard the thud of timber on the sand, and the twang of enemy bows. Battlefields are rarely quiet, as even a king like the Assyrian Shalmaneser I commented. But as he probably knew, noise is a weapon. Homer gives his heroes enormous lung capacity and lion-like roars, and this might not be far from the truth. In the primitive command and control conditions of the day, a leader had constantly to think about communicating with his men. The ability to bellow was a practical advantage, and a heroic scream also served as a psychological warfare against an impressionable enemy. And so Homer's description of a battle later in the war might be applied to that first day of fighting as well, beginning with Hector. With shouts incessant earth and ocean rang, sent from his following host, the Grecian train. With answering thunders filled the echoing plain, a shout that tore heaven's concave. We started on an awkward line. Shouts incessant, earths and ocean rung, sent from his following host, the Grecian train, with answering thunders filled the echoing plain. A shout that tore heavens concave and above, shook the fixed splendours of the throne of Jove. The battle ashore began as the bow of the pine-hulled ship crashed onto the beach, and the king of Thessaly leapt down. He turned and faced the enemy. Leadership by personal example is always a key factor in battle, but rarely more so than in the hierarchical world of the Bronze Age. If a hero did not take the lead, no one would. So when Prostylus, son of Iphiclus, became the first Greek to set foot on Trojan soil, it was not merely a high honour, it was a necessity. But it was a distinction that he had little time to savour, because he was also the first Greek to die. Hector, royal prince and son of King Priam, was waiting for him. He would probably have aimed his spear at a seam in Prostylus's armour, or at his neck, or an unprotected part of his face, all common places for a weapon to penetrate and cause a fatal wound. The great Achilles had thought about jumping ashore first, but was held back because he believed that the first Greek to land at Troy would be killed. He had been warned by his divine mother, Thetis, which may be another way of saying that even tough guys go with their gut feelings sometimes. And so the war had its first combat, casualty, which led to the first widow. At home in the city of Phylace, Prostylus left a wife to tear her cheek, in the sign of mourning. The men in the Trojan vanguard might have tried to push their way onto the enemy ships, or at least to hoist themselves up high enough to grab the ornament off the stern posts as a trophy. Anyone brave enough to try would surely face a rain of enemy arrows and spears, and perhaps be hacked at with swords. It must have been a hard-fought battle, and yet we don't hear a word about the role of the ordinary soldier in it. We can be sure that he was in the thick of things. When it comes to the rank and file, the silence of the sources and the clamour of reality are typical of the Bronze Age Hittite and Egyptian texts. For example, often the Egyptian and Hittite texts often tell the story of a battle the same way. The great king or pharaoh single-handedly defeats masses of enemy soldiers. An extreme case is the official Egyptian version of the Battle of Kadesh. Pharaoh Ramses II killed so many Hittite soldiers that the plain of Kadesh became impassable from all the blood and corpses. Pharaoh had the helps of the gods alone in this victory. In other words, the enemy is a crowd of common soldiers, but our side has one divinely inspired hero. Homer and the other poets of the epic cycle take a similar approach. They focus on great warriors and their divine enablers, generally leaving it to the audience to fill in the experience of the masses. Although Homer does little to put a face on the battle experiences of the rank and file, other sources of evidence allow educated guesses. Start with the Egyptian sculpted relief of the early 1100s depicting a sea battle near shore. It shows the damage that could be done by archers, whether aboard ship or posted ashore. The common man in Bronze Age armies was at risk because he had the flimsiest armour or none at all. Sometimes he even lacked sandals. The dead fell, as the Egyptians said, as crocodiles fall into the water. Fighting their way ashore, the Greeks would have had to wade through corpses, often their own comrades. Once he got ashore, the Greek soldier might have aimed at his Trojan counterpart. Well-armoured Trojan nobles made poor targets, but a Trojan commoner was a fair foil for the Greek spear or sword, if the Greek had one, and for his bare fists, if he didn't. If they teamed up, a group of Greek privates might have captured a Trojan hero or held him for ransom, arms tied behind his back, just as one Greek common soldier boasts in one of Homer's rare glimpses of the enlisted men. But surely more ordinary Greek soldiers fell at the hands of the Trojan heroes. The Greeks were not certain of victory until Achilles, by now ashore, killed Cycnus, a Trojan ally who was inflicting big casualties on the Greeks. Cycnus is said to have had the superhuman power of a son of the god of Poseidon. To use the Greek name, the Trojans might have known him as the old sea god. To declare someone no mere mortal but a god was a Bronze Age gesture of respect to the great and powerful. Achilles is said to have strangled Cycnus with the leather straps of Cycnus's own helmet. Cycnus appears not in Homer, but in the epic cycle. It is a less reliable source, but Cycnus symbolizes both the Bronze Age and the little connection Troy had to the sea. To the sea. Cycnus, I'm going to take a quick drink. Oh, is that a praying image? Praying for all the poor common soldiery who don't get to make it, who get left aside. Everything is done by everyone else. Cycnus was the king of the city of Colone, located on the Aegean coast of the Troad, about 15 miles south of Troy. The site of Colone was inhabited during the Bronze Age. It was a maritime location, opposite this island of Tenedos, which, in some myths, was first settled by Cycnus's sons. No less intriguing, Cycnus is a Greek word meaning swan. Compare the English cygnet. But it also recalls the name Kakuni, a king of Troy mentioned in a Hittite document. We don't know. Oh, so actually it would probably be pronounced Caicnus. Caicnus. I've been pronouncing, yeah, I think Caicnus is probably, yes, because ancient Greek didn't have a soft C sound. I think it only had the hard C. So Caicnus. Kakuni, a king of Troy mentioned in a Hittite document. We don't know just when he reigned, but Kakuni was a predecessor of Alexander, who sat on the throne circa 1280 BC. How appropriate that a name recalling both a Bronze Age Trojan king and the Aegean shore is used for the first man to die for Troy in the war with the Greeks. Achilles' victory sparked an advance. It encouraged Greek superb infantry to press forward, while it made the Trojans think about retreating and regrouping. When the Trojans heard their leaders cry to give up and move back towards the city, the victorious Greeks might have taunted them, calling them weaklings with legs good for nothing except running away. The kind of men who dropped their bows, their packs, and their water skins for a quick getaway. Then the Greeks would have looted the armor of the enemy corpses. Meanwhile, the gatekeepers of Troy would have opened the doors wide to let the exhausted soldiers pour back into town. As news of the dead and missing spread, the sound of wailing would rise. On the citadel, Priam might meet anxiously with his advisors. On the rampart, the watchmen might anticipate that they would be out that night, and for many nights to come. And every time they heard a stranger's voice call out, they would stiffen up. The Greeks had taken their beachhead. After tending to the wounded, gathering their dead, and praying in thanksgiving to the gods, they would proceed to set up camp. Homer insists that the next 9 years the camp was left unfortified. The mere presence of heroes such as Achilles and Ajax offered better protection than any wall or trenches could. Only after Achilles quit in a huff did the Greeks get around to fortifying their base. This is implausible, but not impossible. For example, encamped before the Battle of Kadesh, Pharaoh Ramses II army relied on little more than a barricade of shields for protection. Classical Sparta, to take another case, went without city walls, trusting instead its elite army and its mountains to scare off any attack. But in the Trojan War, the verdict of Thucydides, who knew Sparta, commands respect. After winning a battle upon their arrival, the Greeks fortified their encampment. Tradition says that the Greeks buried Prostylus across the straits near Cape Helles. Of the Hellespont, I assume. Cape Helles, at the edge of the Gallipoli Peninsula. As excavations at the site find no Bronze Age settlement after 1300 BC, about a century before the Trojan War, so the authenticity of the tradition is in doubt. The poignancy of the site is not. Looking south from here, the Greeks could have clearly seen the towers of Troy across the straits, crowned by Priam's palace and the temples of the gods, guarded by a double band of walls, all gleaming in the morning light across the blue surface of the Dardanelles. But long before warlike Prostylus was turned over to the black earth, wherever he lay, a messenger surely brought word to of the battle of Priam. Did the king look his fellow elders in the eye at the news that a hostile army had won a bloody foothold on the Trojan shore, or was he too ashamed and disappointed to share their judgment of what his family's policy had wrought? Maybe Priam thought back to his youth, as old men do, to a great battle on the Sangarian River in Phrygia, where he fought as an allied soldier. Or maybe he preferred to think ahead, to the idea of a fresh start. In any case, the king would have to face the new facts. The battle of the beachhead was over. The battle for Troy was about to begin. And thus we end the next chapter. Now, the next couple of pages are actually some very nice images showing various things with some descriptions. So what I might do is, in the next time I'm reading, I will take some of these photos and show them to you guys. But the next chapter that we're going to be looking at is an assault on the walls. Hello, Jen. Hello, and hello, welcome back, Cry. We actually just finished up. We just finished up the latest chapter. So we made another decent dent. How are you, Jen? Are you good? Oh, it was a bit of a crack there when I stretched. Oh. Doing good. Thanks for asking. I'm pretty good. I'm happy that we managed to make hydration redeem. I was literally grabbing my bottle of water as you typed that out. But I hope those of you who stuck around for the reading enjoyed it. Whether, again, it was used as background noise to whatever you were doing, or as a way to fall asleep, or because you really like learning about the history of Troy. I hope you enjoyed. I'm not too sure if I'm going to end the stream straight away. I might just chat. How are you, Jen? Are you up to anything? Are you just relaxing? Are you preparing for your day? I'm not. Let me get rid of this image here. Thanks, man. No problem, Clever. I hope you enjoyed listening. Yeah, chillaxing and doing homework. Homework. I was always someone who did my homework very quickly after getting home. I would often like have something quick to eat and then just do it, just get it out of the way. Hope your day has been great. Yeah, it has been. It's been pretty good. I'm looking forward to Gry asked me earlier, but my back is all good now. I'm striving to be that person. You got this, Jen. You'll get through your homework. You'll speed through it. Don't worry. Whatever it is, you'll do fine. Ugh. So I guess what I'm thinking is, what will I do in my next stream? I don't think I'll do a reading stream. I think I might take a small break for the next one. Maybe tomorrow I might do some. I'm considering either ASMR proper, or maybe playing some game and trying to do some gaming commentary. And I know that that's going to be tough, because I feel like it's going to be so difficult to... Let me just move this out a little bit. Ooh, that's probably so loud. I'm sorry. My mic arm just kind of dropped for a sec. I was never one to really comment too loudly when I'm playing games, so it's going to be a new thing to try and keep conversation going. But I'm sure I'll be fine. It'll be a new thing. But I'm really looking forward to doing some ASMR, even though this mic, as I think I've said before, what game? I'm not too sure. I think maybe Binding of Isaac would be fun. It's a nice nice roguelike game. If we're lucky, we'll get a wacky run, or maybe Neo Scavenger, which is a pretty fun game. Again, another kind of roguelike where you try and survive in a post-apocalyptic world. It can be quite. I've had many times where I just immediately die of hypothermia, or a couple hours later I die of thirst. So it's a fun, that type of game. I have many other games though. Let me quickly check Steam, because like I have games like CK2. My only worry about some of the games that I'll play is I feel like they might not be the best for a viewer. So it's something like CK2 or Stellaris, these games that take a long time to unfold, could definitely be a little bit tricky. Battle Brothers I have as well. A Legionary's Life is quite fun. It's a game where you play, as the title suggests, a legionary, and you kind of you train different skills and stuff. So I have a lot of choice, and I'll definitely work something out. I have it in my library, but I never played it. I have Apex, but I haven't played first-person shooter games in a long time. We could try something like maybe the only thing actually that I'm thinking about is I don't have any kind of overlay set up for like streaming games, so I'll have to figure that out. So maybe while I figure that out, I can try and do some ASMR. I'm gonna have to try. I might try and like take some inspiration from Sasa and do that, like kind of that way of talking that he does, where how does he do it? He kind of drops his voice. Thank you, Jen. I'll figure stuff out. I'm sure many of the very kind streamer friends that I'm already making my VTuber buddies will be able to suggest some good ways to set up the overlay. I think as long as I'm not taking up too much of the screen and everything is kind of visible. Like even Binding of Isaac can be set up in such a way that I can kind of just be off in the corner and you won't really miss too much, I think. The reading fits your voice so much though. It's clear and relaxing. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I remember I would often be asked to read in school when we were reading texts. I remember I had to read about what was it? It was a couple of lines in Macbeth that were very funny for a group of 15-year-olds to read. Some line from Lady Macbeth. Oh no, I'm ruining the immersion. Not some other story that is similar to Macbeth. Agree. Oh, thank you guys so much. I'm a little concerned because my mic is a dynamic mic, so maybe I can use you guys while you're here to do some like ASMR testing. So because I don't feel like ending the stream too soon. So what I might do is if you guys aren't busy, I might switch my stream over to like trying some ASMR stuff. Oh, look at a little wiggly. Okay, so category ASMR. So all I did was I updated the category. Yeah, okay. Okay. So now I guess I should explain my type of ASMR that I like is sort of non-lewd. I'm not a fan of like ear licking or any of those type of things, and it's very rare that I find someone who does, like kissing noises in a good way. Albin Knox is very good for that, but that's because he does it so softly. But I guess I kind of prefer the more typical sounds, kind of like tapping. But I don't know how clear it comes out. So can you guys tell me if this is like kind of... I'm a little worried because I don't know what filters I need, if I need to change things. Can you guys hear? Is it tapping? Because I'm worried that like maybe in the noise compressors, or not compressors, whatever they're called. What are they called again? Oh, oh my god, yes. I'm so dumb. I'm so dumb. I forget that the... Yeah, so I guess if I turn down the media source, so where is it now? It's at about... Okay. Yeah, I can... So if I turn it down... Oh wait, actually, hang on. I have a... Okay, is it a bit softer now? I turned it way down, like many decibels down. Thank you guys for... Yeah, I think that the BGM is nice. It's nice and soft, and running water is always good. So I definitely would like it to still be there. But let me quickly go grab another... Oh no, this is fine. This is fine, I think. I was just thinking of going to grab something else because I do have a cable that can connect into my mic. But let me just... Is it clear? Is it like... I don't imagine it's as nice as the condenser mics, the proper ASMR mics that people have. But it is a bit... I wonder if I... Oh, I have to go into my sound sources. Ah, you know what? This is going to be something that I'm going to have to do. So what I might... I'm just thinking... Maybe I should do this later. Later on. Tomorrow, I think. Tomorrow evening, I'll do some testing on stuff with... If you guys are around or some other people. Because I have my audio sources as a nested scene. So if I go change them, it will change some other stuff, and I don't want to like forget what my settings were. So I'm going to go make a new scene that's specific to ASMR and have everything kind of set up that way. But as long as it's... Yeah, because I think the noise suppression might be stopping it a little bit. Let me just see if it's particular... If I can stop that by going into studio mode. See, I'm learning how to use stuff. I assume you guys can still see me because studio mode should stop that. Let me just try this. So if I'm just going to take it down. Wait, no, I can just take a snip of the noise suppression. Okay, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to turn off noise suppression. So I'm a little worried that some other sounds you might be hearing, like my fans going or something. But it might be a little bit more clear or less. so it was a noise suppression. I will try and... Oh, can you guys hear me whisper? Does the whisper come true? Okay, I wonder. I will try and pick up a proper condenser microphone. I'm thinking perhaps a Blue Yeti or something relatively simple. Or cheap, I should say. I'm not gonna go buying a 3DO for another while, I think. Okay, me bouncing when I do noises is annoying me, so I'm going to change that a little. Is that nice? The sound of pages turning. I wonder it's just the wind just making noises. I'm going to have to do some listening later to hear how it sounds for you guys. And just mess around with this. Maybe I could ask Sasa for a bit of advice. No worries, Cry. Thank you for showing up. No worries. Don't worry a thing. Wait, no, you can't listen. Hang on. I will send. No worries. It's yeah, there we go. We'll just say that. I think actually I wonder, this will be a test. I'm going to move the foam mic from my microphone. Let me know how this sounds. I hope it's not too screechy. What is that like for anyone who's listening? I apologize if it's not that great. Again, I'm going to have to figure out how to balance things, I think. It might just be the dynamic mics aren't particularly suited. Oh, no. Oh no. Unless you're like far away from the bowling ball and then it's like a distant sound. Yeah, I'm gonna have to. I'll have to. Okay, this was a good. Yeah, far from. Okay. So it's maybe it sounds okay. I'm gonna have to listen back to the VOD myself, and I'll have to get my other cable, that can that allows me to listen into the headset itself, because I don't know how to set certain things up so that I can hear the stream. And even if I was listening to the stream, if I was hearing myself try to talk, and there was any sort of delay, it would absolutely ruin me. That can't happen. But yeah, I think I'm going to end it there, because we've been streaming for just over 3 hours, and I think that's a nice point to leave it. So I'll just bring this back up. I have memories of bowling when I was younger with my family. I beat myself up sometimes, but the days that went smoothly I remember fondly. Aw, I've only bowled a few times. I do have a very, very fond memory of one of my first dates, being in a bowling alley, and kind of the teasing me and this individual were doing as we were competing against each other. Cry, Oggy, I'm back. Welcome back. Welcome back. I was just trying some different things. I was trying the removing my foam mic, or kind of scratching it as well. But I think I'm going to have to work on this myself outside of the stream and do some recording tests. Because I think as well, I don't know how soft I have to do things. But I will look into grabbing a proper condenser microphone so that it's better. But why be so cry? Relax. Maybe Sasa has a point for his spray redeem. I see now. But yeah, I some people I think for myself I've always preferred a soft sounds. So very, very gentle tapping, very gentle stuff. Hard sounds have never really been something that I've particularly liked, but there have been times that they have been nice. But I suppose I will have to remember that some people do like those types of sounds, so they can be things that I can try. What I was thinking, because I don't have any redeems for people to specifically do, obviously if people ask for certain things that I can try, so for example, I don't know, I was about to say heartbeat, but I think those types of redeems are going to have to be done later. One, when settings are better, and two, when the parasocialism has increased to the level that hearing my heartbeat will make people go ee and squee. Okay, so it's all about subtly building up that parasocialism. Some people shy away from it, but no, if you're an ASMR streamer, you actively pursue it. Some people don't like heartbeats too. Which I love. Heartbeats. Heartbeats are one of the best triggers. One of the best triggers. Which, I'll bewitch you, clever. Wait, does bewitch mean what I think it means? All right. Good night. Good night, clever. Have a lovely day or a lovely sleep. That's why I play DVD. DVD. Dungeons and Bedrolls. But yeah, good night, clever. Dead by Daylight. Oh yes, that has like heartbeats in it. But yeah, heartbeats. Heartbeats are one of my favorite. One of my Oshis, Kaida Haru, when he used to do ASMR, he would do he used to somehow do heartbeat and then breathing in the like soft, very soft breathing in the other ear, like that type of stuff, and then also tapping at the same time. I don't know what way he contorted his body to reach around the microphone, but it was a triple threat and it knocked me out. It was so nice. Aggressive breathing. No, it's meant to be relaxing. Although there are people who like don't realize how hard they breathe, and I'm sure I'll figure it out as well. But some people, they'll like it. They'll do a breathing redeem, and it will be like you're suddenly in a tornado. You're like struggling to hold on. Why relax when you can create chaos? That's true. That's true. That's what redeems are for to allow people to mess around. But yeah, I was saying, rather because of redeems, because I lack them at the moment. Of course, if people request things, I'll try to accommodate them as much as I can, within levels of, I'm not doing ear licking, and again, I feel like it will take time to work up to things like heartbeats or kissing. But what I could do is kind of set up like a bit of a timeline. So like I could have in text for the first 10 to 15 minutes of the stream, it might be focused on tapping. The next might be mic scratching. The next 10 minutes might be some other sound, glass tapping maybe, or page. Oh, by the way, did you draw your PNG? No, I did not draw my PNG. My PNG was done by a very good friend of mine. Glass shattering. Yeah. Just throwing glass as hard as I can at the wall next to my microphone. Glass shattering ASMR. This was done by a very good friend of mine by the name of Dance Again Art. I will put his Twitter should be linked in my profile actually, but I will quickly just put it into the chat. Here we go. He has some really amazing art. He's very, very kind as well. He helped me so much at the beginning. I'm really looking forward. He really helped me. He helped me specifically in, furthering my my design idea. Cool. It's giving Old English character. Well, specifically, it's meant to be Irish, Celtic. I think just because this was a very quick sketch, trying to just see if the long sleeves of the Lena would look nice rather than the short tunic that I had, which did look much more English. But the full design that I have coming out, I think, is going to be very, very nice. I'm really looking forward to being able to show it off a little. Um, there's a lot of very nice stuff. Uh, I don't know when it will be. All I know is my mama is working on it, and she's working on kind of the stuff now. Actually, I'm just going to bring up that a little bit more. There we go. But yeah, I'm really excited too, because I think it will just I love it. I love it. I can still make some changes, she says, once she sends on the kind of next step. So I think it might be just trying to get the facial expression, not the expression, but the facial look down. I'm going for something that's kind of a nice balance between a warrior look, but at the same time quite relaxing. And then there'll also be things like a braid and a ribbon through it, and a diadem, and, well, not a diadem, but like a headband and various other things. There might be rings or books or warrior with braid. Amaga. Yeah. Yeah, I think it will look. Like she had some really good ideas. So I'm really looking forward to being able to share it, and it will stay as a PNG for a while. I think. I think it will take a while for me to decide whether I want to, or when to rig it, because, ugh, rigging prices, they're so scary. But not going too crazy with spending stuff. That's okay. It is. It is good rigging especially. I'm sure there are some like amazing riggers that are just buried somewhere in Twitter that it's like a really good deal. But at the same time, if they're doing a really good job, they deserve to be paid for their skills and their time and their effort. And seeing what some of the people on Twitter put out, and even just models that are created, you can see that a lot of care goes into many of them. What was I want to learn how to rig, what time? Yeah. It looks. I don't even know if I want to learn it. It looks like it's so complicated. I could probably do like something super basic, but I think obviously it's not massively important. It's not like the be all and end all, but I do think in the indie scene, expectations for like rigging is a little bit higher than it would be for like fresh face corpo streamers, VTubers. Because typically with VTubers, you wait until like Gen 2, Gen 3, or I say they're 2.0, they're 3.0 versions before they're kind of on par with some of the really nice stuff that you see in indies. Of course, that might just be, it's an aspect of trying to stand out. A well-rigged model helps that, but being a PNG is nice. And I have to say, a part of it was me worrying about, like, would I enjoy streaming? And even though I've only done, like, 3 streams, I'm actually really, really enjoying it. It's, I'm having a lot of fun just being able to talk with people and being able to relax. I think over time I'll figure out how to put things together properly and have a well, I don't want to say oiled, I don't think you should be oiling your computer, but a well-running stream. And it's nice to have very supportive people too, from various different groups. Yeah. I oil my PC. You just see it smoking in the background. But from the kind of group of streamers that I've found myself unintentionally joining with, with those people that I just happen to be watching as well, with people like Sasa and Cry and Jen and those other people who just stopped by to give me their support and sticking around. It's very, very much appreciated, you know. And clever as well, and other people, because it does help. It does help keep going, because you know that, like, I was only thinking, no, that's a no. I've completely lost it. I've completely lost it. Whatever I was going to say. Oh my god. I need to like balance out my Discord notifications, because I have like 30 notifications on my phone. Thoughts went blur. Yeah, that happens sometimes. Your brain moves too quickly, and it kind of short circuits. The worst is when it happens, like at work. Like if you're trying to explain something and it's just like, I mute all Discords except the ones I mod in. That's probably a smart idea. I need to mute all of them, and then just have like one or two of the main like channels of that server open that I want to keep on top of, because it's just too much. Especially like, it seems to wait, my phone, like it waits until like I check something, or just randomly in the middle of the night to spam all the notifications at once and wake me up, specifically to annoy me. uh, I've been going for almost 3.5 hours, so I think, let me see who's around. What I will quickly ask is if there is anyone who is new to the stream or has been watching or comfortably listening, if they could please follow along. That would be very much appreciated. If you want to continue listening to me waffle on about random things, I shall follow. Oh, thank you. Wait a minute. Didn't you already follow? I gotcha. Hmm. Hmm. Oh yeah. I'm you did. Um I think I might just, let me see who is on. I opened Twitch and then I closed it to look at something else. Who to raid? Ooh, ooh. What's Kankaro doing? Ooh, actually, if I'm editing stream info, I should probably let's work out this. Oh, Sasa's streaming. But it's a lot of people. Usually that doesn't. I wouldn't have thought that would stop me, but it feels it's like you're unsure. Yeah, you know what? Let's raid into Sasa. We can say hello to Sasa. It's like one of those things where it's like I guess just size wise, but you know, I'm a fan of Sasa, so I think he wouldn't mind. Oops, clicked the wrong thing. we will raid in. Thank you everyone for watching, and thank you Cry for sticking around. Raid message. Wait, yeah, wait. I have to back. I don't know. Cry, quickly come up with an amazing raid message. Yeah, it should incorporate his, because I'm a subscriber to him too, so I can use um Trojan War. What about oh, there's a song actually. Let me think. Oh, proudly the note of the trumpet is. Oh God, my voice is not good today. Proudly the note of the trumpet is sounding, loudly the war cries arise on the gale. Fleetly. Yeah, we'll just go with Rua raid. Rua raid. I'm not good at it too. It's okay. We'll just go. We'll use his. Go Rua raid. Later on, I want to do something with cattle, because in ancient Ireland, cattle were very important. They were essentially a measure of one's wealth. So I'm thinking maybe something like this. Rua raid. And then we're using his emotes. I'm stealing his emotes. I'm raiding his emotes. They're mine now, Sasa. Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you, Cry. Goodbye. Thank you all very much. I hope you all enjoyed the reading and the random ASMR testing. Riding the horse now. Atsu. Slán go fóill go raibh maith agat.
Oh my, Rua, welcome back. And thank you so much for sharing your community with me. I really appreciate it. I hope you had a wonderful stream, Rua. Can we get a shout out for